The Key to the Kalevala, Pekka Urvest, translation by Tapio Joensuu, edited by John Major Jenkins. The Key to the Kalevala by Pekka Urvest, English translation of Kalevala and Avane 1960. We gratefully acknowledge the great good fortune of being granted permission by Ino Freiberg to use his 1988 English translation of the Kalevala. Freiberg's translation is unparalleled for its poetic beauty and its accurate presentation of the original meter of ancient Finnish poetry. Introduction to the English translation of The Key to the Kalevala by John Major Jenkins. Finland, a small country so far north that it touches the Arctic Circle, preserves a fascinating ancient history and offers a unique and profound wisdom to the world. Bordered by Russia to the east, the Gulf of Finland in the south, the Gulf of Bothnia in the west, and Norway to the north, Finland is the least populated country in the Fennoscandia region. Up until the beginning of the 20th century, it was a little recognized Grand Duchy of Tsarist Russia, devoid of a national identity. However, as political events unfolded, this proved to be more a matter of definition than truth. For Finns, a cohesive cultural identity was close to their hearts for thousands of years. The primary tradition that served as the glue of Finnish cultural identity was the ancient oral tradition, preserved and propagated by storytellers and shamans. They passed down star lore and wisdom teachings in stories called runes, or runos, from the earliest times. And today, Finland is a modern nation that stands on its own, having courageously defied the Russian Revolution by declaring itself independent in 1917. In the early 19th century, Finnish folklore, much of it containing ancient memories and esoteric, cosmological knowledge, was collected into a massive epic called the Kalevala. Intrepid folklorists working out of the universities at Turku and Helsinki, most notably the esteemed compiler of the Kalevala, Elias Lönnrot, struggled to record the runo stories before the oral tradition succumbed to the pressures of modernization. These passionate folklorists, known as rune collectors, traveled the outbacks of Finland, on foot and on snow skis, talking with the peasants, encouraging them to speak the ancient stories. And what a wealth of wisdom was stored in their heads. One man, Arapa Pertunen, could recite over 4,000 lines of poetry. These stories migrated from village to village with pack peddlers and merchants, and thus variant versions of even the best-known myths could be found. The great challenge for Lönnrot, a physician by profession, was to compile and cross-compare his comprehensive data bank of Finnish poetry and, with accuracy and insight, weave it together into a unified whole. By 1849, 50 runos consisting of almost 23,000 lines of poetry were published. This collected work, the Kalevala, based very closely on the original poems collected in the field, is the Finns' national treasure, their national epic that enshrines for them the greatness of their people's past. The Kalevala contains the songs and stories of the ancient Finnish people and has been translated in its entirety into over 30 languages. For most of the last century, European countries have had little interest in Finland's contribution to human knowledge, and less so in America. In fact, despite a growing fascination among English speakers with Celtic mythology, ancient civilizations, mystical teachings, and shamanism, Finnish mythology has remained largely unexplored. And yet it provides a window into all of these topics. Now it is time that the insights into human spiritual unfolding that are encoded into Finnish mythology are shared with the English-speaking West. The work of Pekka Urvest is the perfect place to begin, and we feel that The Key to the Kalevala is destined to be considered a classic. Pekka Urvest was a writer, occultist, and Christian mystic, born December 26, 1875, in Finland. Since early childhood, Urvest searched honestly for truth, but was often beset by the conflicts between idealism and reality that are so common in all walks of life. His passion was to find the real purpose of our existence and how we should live honestly, but he did not find any answers within the religious standards of his day. Finland was largely Christian in the late 1800s, but Urvest was not satisfied with Christian doctrines as they were being taught in church or even in theological seminaries. During his early years at the University of Helsinki, Urvest became acquainted with Theosophy. At this time, the works of Theosophist Madame H.P. Blavatsky were becoming known, and eventually Urvest himself became one of two translators of Blavatsky's classic theosophical work, The Secret Doctrine, into Finnish. Theosophy is a system of philosophical thought based upon spiritual insights into the esoteric, occult history of the human race and its developmental laws. The principles of Theosophy opened up the avenue of inquiry that Urvast had been seeking. Furthermore, through reading the work of the great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy, Urvast discovered esoteric Christianity. The path of the Sermon on the Mount became his path, and its cosmic law became his law. Urvast has testified that when he began to follow the esoteric teachings of Jesus, he entered an occult path wherein totally new worlds opened up for him. He became a spiritual researcher who traveled to realms of knowledge where he could understand the meaning of life and could see human beings not just as living single lives, but as reincarnating spiritual beings, journeying through the school of this world in order to learn and evolve spiritually. Urvast's insights into the fundamental laws of life transcended his interest in esoteric Christianity. Being an avid student of world mythology and religion, and having great respect for his own culture's myths and legends, he specialized in interpreting his national epic according to theosophical principles. As a result, in The Key to the Kalevala, Urvast offers a most comprehensive and inspired mystical reading of the deeply profound esoteric knowledge sequestered within the Kalevala. He saw the Kalevala as a holy book, a sacred text that could be unlocked with the key of Theosophy. In summary, Urvast masterfully interprets the deeper meaning hidden within the Finnish Kalevala according to theosophical principles. Some passages are quite complex and challenging, for Urvast did not shy away from formalizing his insights into a point-by-point system. Many other explanations are very straightforward and accessible, for Urvast was first a speaker and teacher. One even finds the occasional humorous aside. For example, one passage relates the proverb which advises the truth seeker not to awaken sleeping bears. Urvast adds, especially with a stick. As Urvast was foremost a speaker and teacher, The Key to the Kalevala should be read with this in mind. The personal characterization in his writing, often posing rhetorical questions or illustrating a point with hypothetical examples, should give the reader a sense of Urvast's unique voice and speaking style. One can thus be present to Urvast's spirit and his fervent desire to convey the secret teachings of his precious Kalevala to the world. Urvast was blessed with the gifts to accomplish this goal, and continuing interest in Urvast's works, now reaching to the Americas, testifies to his authority and valuable insights. It is unfortunate for all of humankind that Urvast lived and worked in such a restricted linguistic area, and within such a small, isolated country, for he was well versed in all great religions and in the mythologies of many cultures. In our thoughts he should be recognized as a universal humanist living in truth and love, a messenger of light and a bearer of blessings. The poem by John Major Jenkins. Talked with Pekka. Now this editing is finished. I am tired, my duty ended. Learned the magic of old Finland. Heard the chanting, talked with Pekka. Though the sentences all were backwards, flipped around and somewhat awkward. I worked together with the doctor, to unkink them, lead them straightways, so that singers in our times, magic makers in my land, might grow wiser having listened to the runo wizard's wisdom. Theosophical expressions, insights of the far north's teacher, John Major Jenkins, Lafayette, Colorado, December 26, 1997. Foreword by Pekka Urvast. This book values and defends everything in the Kalevala that the great majority of modern civilization thinks is nonsense. It's fairy tales, miracles, exaggerations, and irregularities. The reader will quickly discover that I find a deeper meaning in all of these things. I am of little standing in comparison to the scholars who have already studied and interpreted the Kalevala. I would not have dared to engage in this work unless I was convinced that, ultimately, the real meaning of the Kalevala has escaped detection in scholarly circles. I do not wish to claim that my own understanding of the deeper meaning of the Kalevala is thorough and unerring. My comprehension is undoubtedly both imperfect and subject to correction. But when properly understood, my interpretations open up new directions for further investigation. In consideration of other works along these lines, such as H.P. Blavatsky's references in The Secret Doctrine, a journal article called The National Epic of Finland, M. Ramstedt's booklet The Inner Testament of the Kalevala, which is an instructive overview, Hermann Hellner's Kalevala, a Theosophical Epic, and Rudolf Steiner's Helsinki lecture of April 9, 1912, called The Nature of National Epics with special emphasis on the Kalevala. I take the liberty to hope that my present study will to some extent the key to the Kalevala be accepted with the forgiving goodwill generally given to first attempts. If fate allows, in the future I hope to explore more deeply these interesting aspects of Finnish occultism. In the present work, only a preliminary outline of this subject can be offered. As the Kalevala says, knowledge cannot stay concealed, hidden in some secret burrow. Words of wisdom never vanish, though the wise men pass away. Pekka Urvest, Samadhi, Finland, August 1916. The Kalevala as a holy book. Quote from Helena Blavatsky, without the help of symbology, with its 7 departments, of which the moderns know nothing, no ancient scripture can ever be correctly understood. Symbology must be studied from every one of its aspects, for each nation had its own particular methods of expression. Quote ends. What is the Kalevala? In this book, we will answer the question what is the Kalevala in a way that is probably strange and new for most readers. Shortly, we will introduce ideas about the origin and intrinsic value of the Kalevala that will surprise both scholars and laymen. Thereafter, as the book proceeds, we will consistently explain and defend our views, and deliver them for judgment to the kind reader. We may succeed in convincing the reader of the veracity of these ideas, or he may continue to wonder and even disapprove of our extremely curious perspective. Now, we who see deeper meaning in the Kalevala, we who hear what it has to say about Vainamoinen, can speak loudly and proclaim, if only to soothe our own heart, be at peace. Nothing has been lost because nothing has yet been found. Not even scholars have finished their search. There are discoveries to come which will refute today's conclusion. But what of them? The real worth of the Kalevala lies elsewhere. Its real importance is found in its own secret content. When we now move to present our curious new ideas about the Kalevala, and in consideration of the wounds inflicted on the national heart by misguided investigation, we can rightfully ask, is a man needed to heal them? Cannot the Kalevala itself serve as doctor? Is it not possible to find a cure for the disease from the place where the disease itself was discovered? If the Kalevala, when scientifically analyzed, denies us our national dreams, perhaps when analyzed by other methods the Kalevala reveals a truth beyond those dreams. Perhaps the Kalevala is a completely different kind of book than scientists have allowed. Perhaps it is in the same category of books in world literature that are considered to be holy. Let's think about this a little. If the Kalevala, as we know it today, existed in the pagan age, what value would the Finnish people have given it? Wouldn't the people have seen, as reflected in a mirror, themselves, their best tendencies and most eternal selves? Would they not have sought in the Kalevala consolation and advice, rejoicing for the heart and peace for the conscience? Undoubtedly, for the ancient Finnish people, the Kalevala would have been a most valuable treasure, the holy inheritance of the ancestors. The Kalevala would have been like a Bible, a holy book. And if it was like that then, why can't we have the same viewpoint today? Why can't we approach the Kalevala as a holy book? Why shouldn't we study it knowing it is not an ordinary book? To compare, the historical veracity of the New Testament is claimed by many to be quite vague. Some have even questioned the very existence of Jesus. But has this diminished the New Testament's spiritual power? Has it thrown all Christendom into desperate confusion? Not at all. Christian faith is not shaken by this. Faith upholds Jesus because the New Testament witnesses his deeds. And how does the New Testament witness to and defend his life? Because it is a living book. The best cure for confusion is to read the New Testament. When one reads it, not as an impertinent critic who seeks historical flaws, but as a human being who honestly seeks truth, then the New Testament itself speaks for its own. Then the Christian professes with an exuberant and rejoicing heart, the Testament is holy because it opens my mental sight. Jesus is living because he awakens life in me. What if the Kalevala's nature was like this? What if it had this same power even only for the one who, in the right spirit, could read it? Okay, so this is how we would like to propose that these possibilities should be explored a little. We should endeavor to find out exactly in what sense the Kalevala might be a holy book. First of all, what is a holy book? Is there, so to say, a technical definition of a holy book, one not ambiguous but precise and exact? In fact, there is, but a materialist or one with biased beliefs will not understand it. Only a free-minded person can understand the real meaning of the technical definition of a holy book. In what way can the religious believer and the materialist take each other's hand? Perhaps in the sense that both of them admit boundaries for human knowledge. Both sides know that human knowledge extends far and wide in the visible, material world. We have seen the microcosmic and macrocosmic realms with the instruments of science. There is limitless potential for knowing about the visible life on Earth, and likewise they do not believe a great deal is kept hidden from the intellect in the world of the soul. But both camps agree that human knowledge does have its limits. The thinking goes that a human being cannot solve the enigma of death, cannot explore unseen worlds, nor can one speak directly with the Creator and Giver of life. The only difference is that a religious believer says, God denies us access to certain things. Certain things are unknowable, while the materialist cuts the Gordian knot with one stab and cries there was no knot to begin with. In other words, the materialist concludes there is nothing to explore beyond death nor in the unseen world because the unseen world does not exist and beyond death grins emptiness. The arrogant materialist does not notice that he prematurely claims to possess a monopoly on secret knowledge when he denies life from death. Likewise, one with blind faith doesn't recognize that he goes through life with eyes closed, even though the possibility of realizing this exists. As human beings, we must be very open-minded and admit that human knowledge may be much more vast than what we agree on in everyday life. Only a free thinker can entertain the idea that knowledge may extend into areas that are considered supernatural. One apostle tells us that the human spirit can explore everything, even the depths of God. If we are to understand what a holy book is, we must acknowledge that human beings are capable of obtaining supernatural knowledge. On what basis does this conviction rest? It is based upon clear historical foundations. All known cultures have had intellectual giants, mysterious people who claim to know more than ordinary mortals. These were the world's great philosophers and thinkers, great poets and prophets, saviors and great sons of God. If people turned Jesus into a god, the fault was not his. He called himself a son of man. If one might be suspicious of the historical existence of Jesus, Buddha's life has been historically proven. Buddha and India's wise men taught, as did Jesus, "Follow me because I know the truth." When the lives of these great seers are before us, we are not justified in criticizing, saying what do they know. As free thinkers we can certainly ask, perhaps they knew something, but how can we know what they knew? Have they left behind any evidence of their knowledge? This line of questioning thus brings us to the holy books. The holy books contain testimonial evidence of the existence of seers. In what way? The wisdom of seers is hidden within the holy books. But how do we know that? We understand this when the seer's wisdom awakens in ourselves. When the knowledge awakens in ourselves. This is really a courageous statement. Can a modern person obtain supernatural knowledge? Certainly. In what way? How can he obtain this knowledge? By going the way advised in the holy books. This argument of ours clearly appears to be circular. However, we will see that it nevertheless makes a lot of sense. If one seeks the truth in the teachings of a holy book, the truth comes. When truth and knowledge have thus dawned, one confirms that a holy book certainly is holy, because the wisdom of life and death was found, hidden within. Because there is hidden wisdom in a holy book. Those who launched it there must have been wise seers. Thus, there must have been wise seers living in the remote past. So, how would we now define a holy book? A holy book is a book in which are hidden the divine mysteries of life and death, a book that can guide a seeker to supernatural knowledge. In what way can we then understand the Kalevala as a holy book? We certainly should not assume that every sentence and word in the Kalevala contains hidden wisdom. We should abandon orthodox theories which call for a literal, formulaic reading of holy texts. This just doesn't work for the Kalevala. A letter is not holy and form is not everlasting. So goes the saying, a letter deadens but the spirit inspires. In the Kalevala, some compelling allegorical symbols, archetypes, can be considered holy for the form in which they appear is often unambiguous, but is occasionally obscured with complex additional themes. The archetypes in the Kalevala originate from mysteries and reveal the same eternal mysteries as the images in other holy books. At this point, let us accept that this is the sense of the Kalevala as a holy book. As such, what kind of evidence does the Kalevala contain? The Kalevala suggests that great seers lived in the Finnish past. It contains evidence that the ancient culture of Finland produced mentally sophisticated thinkers. Finnish culture has a history. The possibility that the Kalevala heroes were foreign to Finnish culture vanishes to insignificance. The poetic form of the Kalevala is truly Finnish. Why would Finnish poets give form to foreign concepts? And why make an effort to remember alien stories? The flower of culture unfolds within the collective heart of a people. Finland's tongue itself tells of the ancient glory. The Kalevala sings. Old reliable Väinämöinen lived his days in lyric leisure, in the glades of Väinöä, on the heaths of Kalevala, singing songs and learning wisdom, always singing, night or day. They're recalling and rehearsing memories of bygone ages, the oldest lore of origins, when and how all things began, songs that children cannot copy, nor even wise men understand, in these dreadful days of evil, in this last and fleeting age. The key to the Kalevala. If we now accept that the Kalevala is a holy book, that it contains secret knowledge about life and death and advises us how to obtain this knowledge, how can the ordinary, uninitiated reader notice the supernatural knowledge within? From this perspective, does such a person have any use at all for the Kalevala? One must confess that the uninitiated reader does encounter difficulty at this point. They cannot as yet perceive the Kalevala's hidden wisdom. One is attracted to the Kalevala's formal beauty, its poetic spirit, and its artistic sense. The Kalevala's ideas about human beings and nature challenge the best in world literature. Its genuinely human touch raises it higher than, for example, many books in the Old Testament. But how can we get a grip on the Kalevala's secret content? On what basis should we conclude that its legendary tales, such as those of the Sampo and its theft, are not merely superstitious imaginings? The Kalevala is really like a locked book, and some kind of key is needed to understand it. The seer may have this key, but the ordinary reader lacks it. Where can it be found? There are holy books which are comparatively easy to read, the New Testament, for example. By this we don't mean that anyone could pick up and immediately understand the New Testament as a holy book. However, we are sadly afraid that many readers have never even considered in what way the key to the Kalevala, their beloved Testament, is holy. We suspect that if a truth seeker is attentive enough, he will discover how one needs to read the New Testament to reveal its miraculous secret. This is easy because the New Testament is primarily a guide which advises how a human being should strive for the knowledge of truth. The New Testament was written for people living in an era during which the way to knowledge, with its risks and difficulties, was allowed to become more commonly known because educational standards were rising. In older cultures, on the other hand, the existence of truth knowledge was widely known, but the methods and the details of its nature were kept hidden, protected by teachers and seers. The ancient books are thus veiled in great secrecy yet encode eternal truths. The Kalevala, although recently compiled, belongs by way of its content to the older mystery guides. Its most important aspect is, of course, its presentation of the way to knowledge, and the manner in which it guides the seeker to truth. Besides this, it contains, to a much greater degree than the Gospels, information about the spiritual realms experienced by the truth seeker during initiatory visions, e.g., impressions of the conditions and beings in the unseen world and of the metaphysical philosophy of life adopted by seers. In order for the reader to understand the mystical content of the Kalevala, he would thus need to begin with a sense of the worldview held by sages, mystical poets, and visionaries. Then he would have a key with which to unlock the Kalevala and other holy books. And once the Kalevala's mystical foundations were exposed, perhaps then it would not be so difficult to discern the Kalevala's message regarding the way to knowledge. Is it possible to find such a key? In our own time it is not impossible because there is a philosophy of life, which anyone can learn about, claiming to reflect the knowledge of the ancient sages. Although we should regard it as nothing more than a systematic framework of ideas, it clearly helps us in our Kalevala studies. Very quickly we notice that all wise men and seers, as far as we know, taught the same philosophy of life, which can be found in all religions as a secret wisdom, an esoteric dimension of religion. This is the so-called Theosophical philosophy, in our time elucidated by H.P. Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky's book The Secret Doctrine, her other works, and a rich literature from many different languages explain theosophy. This modern theosophy is not a complete doctrinal system. It only presents certain aspects of the philosophy of seers and wise men, fragmentary features, as H.P. Blavatsky used to say. But those features are so essential that they form an intact outlook of life. As we will later describe this mystery of the ages in detail, we will simply outline here what the secret doctrine speaks about. 1. The absolute divinity, which is the unmanifest ground and foundation of all manifest existence, the peace toward which all good and evil ultimately settle as to the depths of the sea, to the manifest God or the so-called triune logos which generates all spirit and matter, all opposite, all disharmonies of good and evil, and which is, as experiential, existential reality, the common consciousness of the world's innumerable beings, gods and deities. 3. The law of periodicity, which determines how creation and destruction, life and death, and day and night unceasingly follow each other, so that even human experience is an ever-repeating alternation from life to death and to life again. Reincarnation. After the human soul has achieved divine knowledge and wisdom, it will transcend, or be saved from, the cycle of births, for the everlasting law of balance and causality, karma, according to which even the most minute discharge of power in the universe does not vanish, but determines consequences in the same way that it was derived from previous action. 5. The existence of wise men and teachers, the so-called secret brotherhood which supervises the fate and progress of humanity, and, when needed, even intervenes to help it, sometimes through a messenger. If the reader is unacquainted with Theosophy, these concepts will become clearer when we examine the Kalevala runes. For now, suffice it to say that Theosophical philosophy is the key which unlocks the symbolic meaning within the Kalevala. Our study is naturally divided into 3 parts. In the first, we will shed some of the light provided by the Theosophical wisdom of the ages onto certain rune stories to show that the Kalevala's intellectual and spiritual background is comparable to that found in other holy books. We will examine the Kalevala's theology, the story of creation, its understanding of life and death, and so forth. In the second part, we will first explain the Kalevala's psychology of human development, examine how the Kalevala advises us to seek truth through initiation, and then we will briefly assess the higher levels of human development, the secret way of holy knowledge, as given in the Kalevala. Finally, in the third part, we will address the nature of the Kalevala's magical or supernatural abilities conferred by following this way to knowledge. The reader, of course, may be surprised at these words. Does the Kalevala really contain such deep and profound spiritual things? Yes, it does, and it contains things more peculiar than even the rune singers themselves may have suspected. At any rate, it seems even Lonrod had no presentiments of this. Well, probably not. But we now live in a new age. The culmination of materialism has already passed. We are rising again to high spirituality. Spirituality is sneaking into people's souls. The New Age salutes the great value of the ancient holy books, and reveals to us their hidden riches. The Kalevala is received with joy by its sister traditions. Madame Blavatsky did not act thoughtlessly when she selected verses from the Indian Rig Veda and excerpts from Kalevala Runo 1 to adorn the chapter headings in her great book The Secret Doctrine. She did not err when she wrote. The deeper and more esoteric meaning of the Kalevala, however, points to a contest between light and darkness, good and evil, the Finns representing the light and the good, and the Lapps, the darkness and the evil. Compare with this the wars of Ormuzd and Ahriman, of the Aryas and the Rakshasas, of the Pandus and Kuras. The Virgin Birth. What does ancient Finnish wisdom tell us regarding this discussion? Did they have any knowledge of Logos and the Trinity? What does the Kalevala have to say about all this? The Logos Trinity manifests through its activity in the world. What, then, does the Kalevala teach about the creation of the world and its perfection, or, in Christian theological terms, God's salvation? If we understand the Divine Trinity as meaning consciousness, matter, and the world forms engendered by these, we see that the Kalevala gives a central place to these 3 factors. Kalevala and cosmogenesis is the story of Vainamoinen's birth. We must carefully examine this remarkable event because Vainamoinen represents the manifest life of the world. In both the Old and New Kalevala, Vainamoinen's mother Ilmater is mentioned. In the Old Kalevala she plays a marginal role, while in the New Kalevala her identity is described in more detail. In the Old Kalevala nothing is mentioned of Vainamoinen's father, who in the New Kalevala is the wind. Here we have the original, primary trinity of the Kalevala. Father equals wind, mother equals Ilmater, and Vainamoinen is their son. The wind represents consciousness or spirit, Ilmater represents matter, and Vainamoinen represents the world forms. The whole scenario reminds us of Judaic cosmogony in the first book of Moses, where we read that the Spirit of God moves over the waters. From the Kalevala, suddenly a storm wind blew. Out of the east an angry blast blew the water to a foam, heaving up the rollers high. By the wind the maid was rocked. On a wave the maid was driven, round about the blue sea surface, by the whirling whitecaps lifted, where her womb the wind awakened, and the sea foam impregnated. While enduring labor pains, Wainamoinen's mother prays to Ukko, the highest deity. This may be a hint that behind all creative forces and all conscious beings is a secret divinity, about which nothing more is mentioned in the Kalevala. The school of thought led by Professor Carl Krohn proposed that the creation rune which relates the birth of Wainamoinen is insignificant, drawing its concepts from poems about the origin of diseases, swing songs, and what have you. This may be formally correct. I am not in a position to refute it, but this interpretation doesn't address the spirit of the rune. That the spirit of the rune clearly expresses a great creation mystery cannot be accidental, and there is a facet of the creation story which clearly indicates that its spirit is drawn from a knowledge of the mystical worlds. When we carefully compare the Kalevala's Trinity doctrine with other cosmogonies in which the Trinity is found, it somehow feels incomplete to conclude that the sun symbolizes all worldly manifestation. The world just doesn't spring from one momentous union of consciousness and matter. The infinite spirit in the option of finite manifestation unites in the consciousness of the individual being who is thus a creator, logos incarnate. The primary trinity is thus not consciousness, matter in the world, but consciousness, matter in the manifest creator. Only the manifest creator can be observed at the foundation of the world. Quite correctly then, the sun is described as a living personality, Wainamoinen, who, in his own turn, creates the world. Wainamoinen is the great human prototype, Adam Kadmon, Macroprosopis, the great countenance, and humanity is the mysterious knowledge of the Kalevala created in his image. He is the logos weaver of the world, and the product of his meditation and song is the manifest cosmos. The new Kalevala has Wainamoinen coming out of his mother Ilmater's womb after his creation of the world. But in the old Kalevala he is born first and directly participates in the world creation. The old Kalevala is thus closer to the great mystery as we have interpreted it. A feature that is quite important in the creation story involves the virginity of Ilmater and Wainamoinen's official fatherlessness. His mother is described as a living being while his father is just the wind, a more abstract and inconsequential parentage role. Kalevala Runo 1 quite often reads grandly and magnificently. Lonely come the nights upon us, lonely dawn the brightening days, lonely born was Wainamoinen. Professor Krohn claims that the first two verses are of foreign origin, and that the third is a creation of Lonrot's. So be it. Lonrot thus behaves like an authentic rune singer, or at least like a visionary. His inspiration really struck home, for in those verses he describes the birth of God's only son, meaning born from one origin. Here resounds the ancient mystery of the birth of the Logos. It takes place by itself in the sense that the Logos is the first and only manifestation at the dawn of time, and also in the sense that it is a virgin birth by supernatural means. Krohn's claim that the Kalevala's tale of Wainamoinen's virgin birth is derived from the Christian faith is unlikely, simply because the doctrine of virgin birth is found in many religions much older than Christianity. Osiris in Egypt was born of a heavenly virgin named Neph. Likewise, Horus was the son of the virgin Isis. In Babylonia the sun god Tammuz was Eridu-E's only son. E is equivalent to Ishtar, Astarte, and Mylitta. In Persia, Zoroaster was conceived by a ray of divine intelligence, and his mother was a virgin. In Mexico, Quetzalcoatl was born from the virgin Chimom. And in the Yucatan, Bacab was born from the virgin Cairibira and was worshipped as a savior. Likewise for the Aztec sun god Huitzilopochtli. In India, Krishna's mother Devaki was a virgin, as was Buddha's mother Maya. And of course Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary. These stories are certainly just legends separate from the historical characters. But when a person's name is symbolic of divine forces, then the virgin birth is an accurate poetic description of great relevance to the nature of the spiritual world. In Christian theology, the Christ is truly the Logos, the word through which the world is created. Similarly, Krishna is regarded as an avatar or incarnation of the second, divine person Vishnu, and is called Hari, he who removes sin. His mother Devaki calls him with the words You, the God of gods who is all in everything. Osiris and Horus were called the King of Kings and the Master of Masters respectively. Osiris was also referred to as the master of the whole country. As a historical person, Wainamoinen was born like everyone else, but Wainamoinen as god and son Logos was born of Ilmater, the beautiful virgin of the air. The act of creation. In scientific quarters, it is generally agreed that, prior to Kant's scientific exposition on the origin of the world, cosmogenesis was a topic dealt with only through philosophical speculation. By the time Laplace in the early 1800s fully developed Kant's theories, cosmology had become a topic of scientific study by way of astronomy. As we understand it, the Kant-Laplace theory proposes that solar systems originate from nebulae coalescing through circulation around a dense center. The Sun was originally a huge gaseous sphere spinning on its axis. The surface mass split off into smaller spheres spinning in the opposite direction, and these formed into planets orbiting the Sun. This theory prevailed throughout the 19th century. Among others, H.P. Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine made strong comments against this model, and in fact it is no longer scientifically adequate. Science has made several observations which disprove parts of the Kant-Laplace edifice, and has attempted to present new theories of cosmogenesis, but none have been completely accepted. When the Emperor Napoleon learned of Laplace's astronomical ideas, he wonderingly asked him, "Where, then, does God live?" Laplace's boastful reply defines the theory's own futile emptiness. We no longer have any need of God. Scientists have not been able to solve the enigma of the world's origin with materialistic philosophy. Ultimately, God is necessary. God is the reason of the world's becoming, the first impulse and prime mover. The ancient visionaries who populated space with gods and living beings were closer to the truth than our learned but spiritually blind priests of materialism. We are not justified in regarding ancient religious cosmologies as naive and superstitious. Their forms may seem unsophisticated and unscientific, but if we can adjust our eyes to the mystic vision behind the forms, we will realize how insightful they really are and that they reveal profound cosmological ideas unapproached by science. The ancient cosmology doesn't concern itself with mechanical forces which determine the solar system's formation, but rather it focuses on the invisible template which guides the process of physical manifestation. In other words, the ancient doctrine describes cosmogenesis from a higher viewpoint, from God's viewpoint, instead of from the perspective of physical being. And who else but a seer, inspired by the Holy Spirit of truth, would venture to fathom the depths of God? The birth of the world has therefore always been called the creation of the world. Creation is an activity and requires an actor, a mover, a creator. The entire process of cosmogenesis is the act of a living creator. The creative act does not draw from an empty reservoir. It is not intellectually inconceivable, nor is it a logical contradiction. Nothing can arise from emptiness. Everything that is, has always been and will forever be. Matter, in its original state, is as eternal as spirit or consciousness, and both are unified in the unmanifest absolute divinity. Creation is the action of divine, reasoning beings to project and fulfill their inspirations and desires with the help of material elements. Creation is an artistic act. Let's look at how Finnish sages describe the act of creation. Consequently, we will understand how the Creator Logos manifests, shall we say, in triplicate. In other words, it will become clear that the creative act has three phases. In reading the text of the New Kalevala, we immediately see three creative stages: 1. Conception, 2. Pregnancy or gestation, and 3. The actual act of creation or birth. Because the total creative process comes from Logos, Vainamoinen, we must remember that the other beings involved are variant names for Vainamoinen's other aspects. Instead of Ilmater, we can substitute Vainamoinen, because one etymology for the name Vainamoinen has it meaning water mother. Lonely born was Vainamoinen, all alone, the poet immortal. So reads the Kalevala, subtly revealing a secret cosmic knowledge. In the old Kalevala one reads, "At night was born old Vainamoinen. The next day he went to see the smithy." Thus it appears that Vainamoinen was ancient when he was born, a wise seer of secret knowledge, truly a poet immortal. It is succinctly related here that the Creator has lived before, maybe had grown and attained wisdom in a distant past. The Creator existed before the inactive state in which, as Ilmater, he now dwells. Long maintained in holiness, her eternal maidenhood, in the far horizoned heavens, level meadows of the air. After previous activity, Vainamoinen as creator rested in the unmanifest realm of clear consciousness. But in time she wearied of it, was estranged from this odd living, always being by herself, ever living as a virgin, in those far horizon heavens, in those vast and empty spaces. Thus the will to create reawakened. It kindled in the Creator's heart an idea for a new world. The creator artist, the act of creation conceived, and the so-called first logos or will of the world was born. So at length she then descended to the sea waves down below, to the open clear sea surface, out upon the open ocean. At the moment of inspiration, as soon as the proto-image is visualized in the divine imagination, the descent into matter from the realm of pure consciousness begins. Logos sleeps surrounded by the absolute unmanifest chaos, which is often called a sea in ancient cosmogony. The idea kindled by the logos within the world of consciousness condenses, or materializes, a form from the idea. Conceptualization underlies and guides creation. The logos, suffering the creative act within, now becomes dual while seeking a suitable form for his new image. From the inspired idea and the inevitable splitting off of the created from the creator, now flares love. From the will to create now comes emotion or relation, and mother begins to labor. As the mother of the water, aimlessly the virgin drifted. She swam eastward, she swam westward, she swam south and northwestward, swimming round the whole horizon. In the anguish of her birth pangs, and her belly's bursting pains, yet the borning was unborn, still the fetus undelivered. What a splendid psychology! The human creator also moves from initial inspiration to a state of suffering when he wants to substantially manifest his idea. So many in this state must think as Wainamoinen did. Had it been for me, have stayed the airy virgin, and must pray within to loose the maiden from her misery, and the woman from her womb ache. The suffering of creation has not yet reached the overwhelming reason to create, and we are thus still within the second logos, the world emotion which by nature is bisexual, consisting of matter and spirit. Help is needed and help will come. Now the work begins and agony is forgotten. Wainamoinen is rolling on the waves of the mother. When a scaup, the honest bird, came on hovering here and there, searching for a nesting place, for a spot to build her home on. And Wainamoinen, that is, Ilmater, raised her knee above the surface, and her shoulder from the wave, as a refuge for the scaup, and a welcome resting place. The scaup spied Wainamoinen's, the water mother's, knee, and it is there she builds her nest. There she laid her golden eggs. 6 were the golden eggs she laid, but the 7th was of iron. What is this scaup? The graceful bird which makes the creator forget his agony. It is the mind of thought, reason and insight, or more precisely, the intellect which invents form. Every worker breathes a sigh of relief when he hits upon the solution to a troubling problem. The first glimmer of the solution comes like a bird flying in from the darkness of space. The bird is an appropriate symbol of thought. We find it in several ancient religions. In India there is the swan of time, and in Christian faith the Holy Spirit is represented by a dove. The scaup or the eagle symbolizes the Creator's thought that touches upon many spaces. It symbolizes Wainamoinen's active reason or the third logos, the Holy Spirit, whose task is to organize the primal chaos. What does the eagle do? He organizes the elements into various types of atoms. He identifies 7 types of fundamental atoms, 6 golden atoms of the invisible world and 1 iron atom for the physical world. The numbers may vary from 3 to 8 because planes and worlds can be classified in different ways. The scaup's 7 eggs are definitely atoms. They are not the planets or the sun because these will be born next, after the eggs are laid and grow warm. Wainamoinen, that is, Ilmater, jerked her knee and the eggs rolled into the water, and were broken into bits. The fragments became the earth, moon, sun, and planets. Only love with reason can create the world. Perhaps we should say that atoms join together when the world is created instead of breaking into pieces, but actually it makes no difference. The latest studies in atomic theory have led to the conclusion that atoms are perfectly organized worlds, miniature solar systems if you will, almost like Leibniz's monads. So there is not a significant difference between big and small. On a greater dimensional scale, the cosmos as we recognize it is just a microcosmic splinter from a cosmos of many planes. By this reasoning, we can say that an atom is a broken fragment in our world, or, conversely, that the same atom is a whole cosmos in some other world. The profound knowledge of ancient wisdom peeks out at us from the Kalevala. Furthermore, the Kalevala clearly describes how the process of creation continues. Wainamoinen, that is, Ilmater, set to work on her creations, hastens on her handiwork, where she gave her hand a turn. There she put the capes in order. Where her foot struck bottom, there grottos for the fish were formed. Where the bubbles reached the surface, there the deeps were made still deeper. After this we must jump to the second rune of the Kalevala, where creation continues with the story of the big oak. Now we shift from the level of the solar system to the level of the earth. In the book of Moses, a desert existed before water came to form a sea around which trees could thrive. Soon thereafter comes Pellervoinen, son of the field, who represents organic life brought from somewhere else. Leisurely he sowed the land and sowed the swamps, sowed the fallow open stretches, even sowed the rocky barrens. The earth was green and produced many trees and all kinds of plant life, but still to grow was God's tree. Only after it grew and was felled by the little thumb-sized man could the act of creation, true agriculture, begin. As Julius Crone rightly commented, this God's tree, the big oak, was a large cloud which hid the sun and moon from view, and which only the little man, a ray of sunlight, was able to break up, rather than indicating just one event. This story really symbolizes the Earth epoch in which atmospheric moisture was extreme and rain was a constant natural phenomenon. Only when this era of rain dispersed did the sun begin to shine, so that berry bushes grew abundant, golden flowers filled the meadows, and the grasses multiplied, every kind of herb arising. Thus the stage was set for the dawn of true agriculture. At the seashore Väinämöinen finds 6 grains, 7 seeds, and starts sowing. Other secret traditions tell that grains of wheat were originally brought to earth from another star. We now return to the first rune, which we left earlier, and come to quite a strange paradox. All this time the creator Väinämöinen has been busy working, but he has not yet been born. Now the islands were in order, and the small isles of the sea, pillars for the sky, were planted, lands and continents created, on the rocks the writs were written, and the signs drawn on the cliffs. Yet Väinämöinen is unborn, poet eternal not emerged. While reading the Kalevala, we of course are misled by the fact that in certain situations the names Väinämöinen and Ilmater are equivalent, but when we remember that they are interchangeable, one wonders why Väinämöinen is not yet, at this time, born. In the old Kalevala he was definitely born earlier. Has the new Kalevala gone astray because Väinämöinen as the true logos has, according to our presentation, already emerged? Not at all, because the new Kalevala refers to a strange plot twist, the second creation. Creation has begun, the worlds have already been formed, but what is lacking? It lacks human beings, it lacks the image of God. And we need not think that there are no living things yet. The world is truly full of life, and life can exist without the presence of human life forms. But before the creative process drives consciousness into a life form, Väinämöinen as the triune logos has not yet separated from his mother's womb. Only after human intellectual, emotional, and mental life awakens will Väinämöinen be fully born. What else is the work of creation other than the Creator's intention to reveal himself? I want to see my own image, and one image after another is rejected. This isn't me, that's not truly me. Only in humanity does the Creator begin to see himself. And deep within the human soul dwells the Creator's will to see himself in his completeness. Therefore a person does not find tranquility until he realizes his innermost divine longing and aspires toward perfection. A perfection he was created for. God's voice prays within the seeker. Guide the traveler to the land, child of mankind to the open, to behold the moon in heaven, and to wonder at the daylight, get to know the Great Bear's grandeur, or just to stare up at the stars. And by his own doing, God assumes the human form. He pushed against his prison lock, pressing with his nameless finger, slid the bony bolt aside. With his left toe opened it, scrabbling with his nails he came, crawling through the exit door. The Creator first devises his essential triune nature. Then comes the second creation, the gift of the triune nature to humanity. From the seer's standpoint, the whole cosmogony is the creative act of a great artisan. It is agony and it is joy, and its expression in the Kalevala is pure mastery. How tranquil the cosmology of the Kalevala appears in its simplicity. In it there are no ordinary human emotions, yet it contains greater emotions, greater strength, divine thoughts, and divine will. It rises before our eyes sublime, majestic. The act of salvation. In theological teachings, salvation is said to be that divine action which leads a humanity fallen into sin towards a reunion with God. This usually happens through the Trinity's second person, the Son, who is then regarded as the Savior of humanity, as with Christ, Krishna, or Horus in Egypt. However, of course the entire divine Trinity is involved. For example, in Christianity, the Holy Spirit leads the church and individuals to Christ, while God the Father loves the world so much that he let his only Son die as atonement for the world's sin. If there is any doctrine which Christians cherish as theirs alone, it is this doctrine of divine salvation. They exuberantly cry out, "The pagans and other primitive people did not know anything about Jesus Christ." And we respond, it is true that pagans had no knowledge of the Savior called Jesus Christ. But it is a different thing altogether to say they knew no Savior at all. The world has been around for much longer than 6,000 years. To our thinking, it is blasphemy to say that the humanity of hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps millions of years, were wandering in darkness, going to eternal damnation, until just a few thousand years ago when God the Father glanced at the earth and decided something ought to be done about it. But let us leave well enough alone. Suffice it to say that the divine act of salvation is not a moment in history. It happens through long ages of learning and development. Spiritual darkness exists today as it did 10,000 years ago, and light is possible today as it was 1,000,000 years ago. Darkness and light go hand in hand until the light triumphs within the individual. Salvation is not exoteric by nature. Clearly, salvation is intrinsically esoteric. This is why we are not cautious in proclaiming that the ancient Finns and other ancient cultures were aware of and experienced what we call divine salvation. We just have to remember that religious forms change, but the underlying essence doesn't. Superficially seen, pagans and natives have a different concept of spiritual life and the task of humanity than do Christians. But discern with a spiritual eye. The inner experience of an authentic pagan seer and an initiate into Christian mysteries is the same. When we begin to examine the way Finnish seers understand mankind's development and salvation, we must remember that in ancient symbolic systems, names and words had multiple meanings depending upon their context of use. These different meanings are not arbitrary. For example, a red string simply exists. Variations arise from differing shades of its primary meaning, different perspectives on the thing itself rather than on totally different meanings. In ancient times, names and designations were not chosen in the manner of scientific exactness as in our day. Rather, the whole language of definition was allegorical or poetic. Earlier we explained how the name Kalevala means logos in mystic language. Then, in the creation runes, we saw how Vainamoinen adopted the role of the logos. Finally, Ilmater and certainly even the Skop express distinct activities of the logos. Furthermore, in other places the Kalevala relates that Vainamoinen is Kalevala's son. This comes as no surprise when we consider that logos has the general meaning of son of God. Overall, we understand that Vainamoinen is only an aspect of the consciousness of logos, or, alternatively, of Kalevala. It is told that Kalevala had 12 sons. If we ever discover the names of all 12 sons, we will know the ancient mystic names of the hierarchy of the divine logos. These are also the 12 signs of the zodiac. 7 of these names also represent the 7 primary angels, those nearest the throne of God, who are the astrological rulers of the 7 holy planets. 3 of the names symbolize the 3 aspects of the logos consciousness, which indicate its full nature. This is why the Logos Trinity is said to consist of 3 personalities or masks. 3 names have been preserved for us in the Kalevala, as well as a few others, but at least these 3 are certain. And who are they? They are none other than the Kalevala's 3 primary heroes, Vainamoinen, Ilmarinen, and Lemminkainen. When we decide to become fully absorbed in the psychology of the Logos, we must examine Vainamoinen, Ilmarinen, and Lemminkainen as expressions of divine forces. These forces are revealed in humanity's spiritual and mental development as well as in each individual's inner life. Grand visions unfold in front of our discerning eye when we venture deeply into these things. We outlined earlier how the psychological trinity of the Logos corresponds to the 3 divisions of the human psyche or soul. First, Logos as father is the power, the crown, Kether, which corresponds to human willing. Second, Logos as son, the ever-attractive love wisdom, corresponds to human feeling and emotion. Third, the Logos as Holy Spirit is the actively discerning divine genius of the light of truth, corresponding to human reasoning or thinking. When we now compare this system to the designations in the Kalevala, Vainamoinen clearly represents the divine will, Lemminkainen the divine emotion, and Ilmarinen the divine intellect or reason. In support of this Trinity doctrine, we specifically read about Vainamoinen in the Old Kalevala. And I, Vainamoinen, was the 3rd man, began designing the hem of the air, lifted up the firmament, and put the stars into the sky. Eventually, we will also look at Lemminkainen and Ilmarinen. And if our claims here initially seem to come out of nowhere, it will be better supported as we overview what the Kalevala tells us about all three of its heroes. For example, in the Kalevala, what motivates the three of them? What is the shared goal of their activities? In the beginning, at least, their pursuits involve winning the daughter of Pohjola. Let us focus on this. All of the Kalevala heroes court the daughter of Pohjola. Each one of them wants her for his very own. The reader may wonder, what is so divine about this? And we respond, their divine activity is revealed in this. Hieros gamos, or sacred marriage, generally a term referring to the highest human love, is mystical language which contains a deep psychological truth for the seer. In the Christian faith, Paul's writings relate that Christ is a bridegroom while the individual human soul, the congregation and the church are his bride. Even the realistic and popular poem Love's High Song is written in a form of deeply symbolic nomenclature. Christians should also be familiar with the intriguing line from the first book of Moses. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And who doesn't know the beautiful Greek story of Amor and Psyche? What divine truth do these allegorical stories contain? It is the same message as contained in the words the divine act of salvation. These stories explain and make clear how divine consciousness loves and pursues the human soul, how it endeavors to join the human soul and thereby raise it up. Väinämöinen, Lemminkainen and Ilmarinen all live in Suvantola, on the heaths of Kalevala, where the weather is eternally summer. In other words, they live in the higher planes of the invisible world and from there pursue the daughter of Pohjola. And Pohjola is described as gloomy, benighted. Its only charm is the daughter of Pohjola herself. What else could Pohjola be but the valley of despair? And what else could the daughter of Pohjola represent but the spiritual seed within the collective consciousness of humanity? And from the viewpoint of the individual microcosm, Pohjola is the mortal life of the body. And the lovely virgin of Pohjola is the human soul within the body. The Kalevala heroes which court the daughter of Pohjola represent the divine, developmental forces which educate the human soul and work to create a new, better humanity. Why should we be ashamed of the Kalevala's somewhat peculiar presentation of divine mysteries when we are not ashamed to talk about, albeit in a more philosophical language, God's love, Christ's love for his bride, and so on? The great wisdom of the Kalevala is evident in the simple fact that we don't read in it of human beings yearning for God and thirsting for truth. Rather, we learn of God's love and yearning for humanity. Everyone intuitively knows that human yearning is only a dim reflection of the divine yearning which higher beings feel for humanity. And God loved the world, whispers the Christian in a holy presentiment of truth, but he is surely mistaken in supposing that God did not actively love his creation from the very beginning. And how do the Kalevala heroes fare in their courtings? How do the divine forces succeed in their salvation project? Väinämöinen does not win the daughter of Pohjola nor Aino, and neither does Lemminkainen. Only Ilmarinen succeeds. This fact reflects an astute psychological insight and a deep understanding of life's developmental laws. After all, which aspect of the divine consciousness catches the human soul and draws it Godward? Is it the will? No, the human soul is too full of fantasies and desires to unhesitatingly comply with God's will. And what of emotion? No, pride is a great weakness of the human soul, leaving it incapable of being satisfied with God's love. In its initial awakening, the human soul yearns for divine help, strength, and guidance, a maturity abundant with abilities in which one can wholeheartedly believe. And this core ability is ratiocination, the reasoning intellect. Ilmarinen, as the exponent of thought, intellect, and genius, takes the mate of Pohjola for his one and only. What would be the fate of the human soul without the light of reason, without the faculty of independent reasoning? There can be no choosing between good and evil. There can be no free will which makes us human. The human being would be an unconscious puppet in God's hands, alive but without merits. The Ilmarinen forces are therefore the first to become active in the life of humanity, and the Väinämöinen forces are the last. Among people today, we cannot yet observe a human divine will as a common phenomenon. Human will, as psychologists point out, is so easily dissolved in a substrate of desires and emotions. True willing is something esoteric. Today it is found only in mystics and gifted people. Väinämöinen is truly the eternal seer, the poet immortal who accomplishes more with his songs and his willing words than all the others. Väinämöinen is the Kalevala's preferred Superman par excellence, and his duty in the act of salvation is to the individual rather than the collective. His effects are therefore found in the later developmental stages. The Lemminkainen forces. In the courtship runes, the Kalevala does not describe its heroes as complete beings. Although they represent, in the sense we are talking about, divine forces, we find them in the Kalevala to be very human, even, at times, weak. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, experienced Weissman, has the will and strength to master himself and nature, yet in courting the young maiden he behaves remarkably unwisely and foolishly. So his love for the young Aino, and its weakness and blatant senselessness, can be seen as nothing less than tragic. Lemminkainen, the handsome Kaukomieli, the far-minded, whose total being exudes enthusiasm and confidence, poetry and love, is also a quarrelsome and quick-tempered warrior who is adventurous yet fickle in the ways of love. Ilmarinen, the eternal smith, the forger of the Sampo, is industrious, capable, ingenious, and skillful, but is often somewhat slow, lazy, sullen, even childishly simple-minded. By making its superhuman heroes so human, the Kalevala endears them to us so much that we almost forget their divinity. It seems as though the Kalevala wants to accentuate something by contrasting each hero's fundamental character. Look and see, it says, what is best in each, what develops and grows. Stagnation rests like death in its place, but the living spirit goes forward. This developmental principle runs like a golden thread through Lemminkainen's story. Lemminkainen, who represents the raging cauldron of emotional forces within humanity's heart, manifests through his life path the sequential developmental stages of these emotions. This has been formally demonstrated by the fact that the Lemminkainen runes, as Professor Krohn shows, 35 consist of many stories which are apparently about different people: Audi Saarelainen, Audi Islander, Kaukomieli, Panoinen Poika, the gallant boy, and so on. But in the poetry of the people's imagination, these are merely variant names for the same being. By the names Kaukomieli and Audi Saarelainen, Lemminkainen makes love to the island girls and takes Kyllikki for his wife. As Lemminkainen he proposes to the maid of Pohja, and the tale of his death originates from the rune of Panoinen Poika. Lonrod, in the new Kalevala, with great psychological insight lets the Kaukomieli and Kyllikki episode occur in Lemminkainen's youth, before his adventure as rival suitor for the Pohja maid. This is because the Kyllikki rune belongs to an earlier period in the developmental history of the Lemminkainen forces within humanity. As Audi, Lemminkainen grew up in a high-born home, with his most devoted mother. He became the best of men, as he blossomed out red-blooded, in all points quite capable, and a good man all around 36. And he had only one fault: always playing around with women, always at the all-night parties, to the pleasure of the virgins, at the rompings of the braidheads. The rune almost scoffingly refers to Lemminkainen's weakness, but with a humor characteristic of the Kalevala's treatment of its heroes' misadventures. When examining the Kalevala from its esoteric or occult viewpoint, this quality must be taken into consideration. Lemminkainen receives praise. His suave power and skills are extolled. With his songs and incantations he entrances all. But in the rune we perceive a slight mockery. How are we to understand this? This mocking quality reflects what we might call a critical factor within Finnish wisdom. Wisdom knows all the facts. It knows that emotion is, at least for the time being, the greatest force in humanity. It knows that emotion's naive egoism and indiscretions get projected into nature as superstitions and nullifying nonsense. It knows that, stimulated by emotion, humanity performs its greatest heroic acts and miraculous deeds. Meanwhile, however, wisdom also knows that humanity has not yet mastered its Lemminkainen forces, and we clearly see this in Lemminkainen's arrogant and despicable attitude towards Wet Hat, the blind cowherder. At the moment before his victory, Lemminkainen is deceived by his own emotions, and his tragic death is the result. The roots of emotion go so deep in a human being's physical makeup that for good reason one must fear them until one has thoroughly purified the heart. To be specific, what is the original root of the emotional Lemminkainen forces? With certainty, it is surely human sexuality. The ability for divine love and the highest potential of human emotion are clearly related. But physical sexuality awakens emotions to life by identifying an external focus for emotion. The Kalevala is right on the mark. Emotion is a wonderful thing, but its weakness is that it imbibes its power from sex. When Lemminkainen's fickle pleasure-loving and sexually urgent emotional behavior subsides, love can be focused for a longer time on a chosen object, and the Kiliki episode begins. However, neither in Lemminkainen nor Kiliki have the emotional forces been purified. It requires oaths and swears oaths and as a result drowns. Only in proposing to the maiden of Pohjola does Lemminkainen overcome all kinds of obstacles, and simple daring and violence are of no help here. His victories win him merit, and as he is gradually released from his emotional selfishness and conceit, he begins to understand what love is. In this way, the emotional life of humanity is gradually purified and ennobled. Blustery pride grows humbler and becomes faithful devotion, in keeping with the Finnish character. Even in Lemminkainen's final words, the Kalevala refrains from weepy and excessive emotion. While dying, Lemminkainen succinctly acknowledges his deep reliance on his mother's love and thus reveals his own profound and faithful affection for her. O my mother, you who bore me, suffered, watching over me, if you knew, if you sensed, where your miserable son is now, you would come without delay, hasten hither to his aid. And later, after his mother has raised him from the dead, he immediately remembers his deep love and affection for the maiden of Pohjola, for whom he suffered so many trials. For in truth my heart is yonder, and my sentiments are there, among the little maids of Northland. Here the plural little maids is just a kind of pluralis modesty, a formal plural. In exploring the details of these events very carefully, we can observe in Lemminkainen's life 3 overall stages which, in turn, symbolize the 3 developmental periods in the history of humanity's emotional growth. 1. The immature or childish phase, when emotions are fickle, careless, and superficial, fluttering from one attachment to the next. 2. The youthful stage, in which it desires to grab hold of life, and with oaths and promises attempts to remain faithful to ideals. 3. The stage of full maturity, when it knows that nothing can be achieved without constant effort and occasional victory. There is another stage that we have not described yet, the transition from animal to human. Certain secret traditions discuss the blind or instinctive emotional existence such as we find in the animal kingdom. Has the Kalevala overlooked this? As far as we can tell, it has not been overlooked, but is only referred to in passing. When Lemminkainen sings everyone out of the Pohjola house, he leaves only one alone, a most wicked cattle herder, that old man, the shut-eye herdsman. This blind man of Pohjola, Wet Hat, the cowherder, asks why he was not enchanted out of the house with the others. Lemminkainen answers, "This is why I did not charm you, since you're ugly enough to look at, let alone the touching of you. When you were a stripling boy, and a worthless cattle herder, you deflowered your mother's child, raped your very own sister, and you harried all the horses, then abused the mares and fillies. On the swamps and in the quicksands, the muddy waters gather." The blind cowherder is a symbol for the age when a newly born humanity consorted with beasts, a phase H.P. Blavatsky mentions in her book The Secret Doctrine. The light of reason was as yet so dim within humanity that they could do little more than mimic animals and rush headlong into total emotional submission to the sexual instinct. This original fall is found in paradise myths and has really provided the foundation for humanity's later suffering. The sexual instinct has always been humanity's fateful weakness, causing great distress. The same humanity that now, for the most part, plays out the roles of Adi Saarelainen and the beautiful Kakomili, earlier acted instinctually like the blind cowherder and thus, in this life, reaps tragedy from the karmic consequences of its original sin. In Theosophical literature we read about humanity's root races. The first 2 were superphysical, and not until the 3rd root race did human beings actually have physical bodies. Its homeland was a continent which sunk to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, named Lemuria by the natural scientist P.L. Sclater. The above-mentioned fall into sin took place with this 3rd root race. The 4th race was Atlantean race. They lived on the island called Atlantis, which sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Plato tells us of the last fragment of Atlantis, a small island called Poseidonis. In the Kalevala, both Adi Saarelainen, Adi Islander, and Kiliki lived on the island, and therefore in their names as well as their psychological content they belong to the Atlantean phase of emotional development. Adi or Velamo refers to the emotional plane, the symbol for which has always been water. According to the secret doctrine, humanity now lives in the 5th or Aryan root race. A small minority of humanity are, in their emotional lives, at the level of the true Lemminkainen, but the greater part continues in the style of Kakamoinen. The yet-to-be-born 6th and 7th root races are still purifying humanity's Lemminkainen forces so that human beings in everyday life can comprehend and fulfill the love of Christ. The divine act of salvation is fulfilled in the gradual development of emotion. Its ultimate fulfillment occurs when personal emotions such as good and evil are absorbed into the great ocean of divine love. Fulfilled Lemminkainen therefore represents the highest, most sublime expression of humanity's Christ forces. Lemminkainen Christ. For a Christian, it almost might feel like we are defaming the great saint when the old wayward adventurer, the Arctic Don Juan, is set up beside the holy, pure, and majestic Christ. Be that as it may, our aim is not to argue that the Kalevala describes the divine mysteries of the human soul as beautifully or as sublimely as the New Testament. The wisdom of the Kalevala comes from another age. Naturally, its external clothing is different. Our intention is only to emphasize that the wisdom of the Kalevala is essentially the same as, for example, the New Testament, and that it knew the same facts about the development and goal of the human soul. The Kalevala describes and evaluates the emotional life in its own way. It recognizes the functions of reason and knowledge. But in its wisdom it knows that emotion is the greatest magic force and most effective regenerator of the human soul. How moving and sublime it is when the brightness and strength of the self-denying love of Lemminkainen's mother overcomes even death. The discrepancy between Christ's sublime purity and Lemminkainen's apparent normalcy is really quite easy to explain. Christ exemplifies the final goal of emotional sublimation, its highest divine expression. Lemminkainen contains at all times all the contradictions and struggles of previous emotional levels, while never forgetting the final goal. In the Kalevala, we clearly find a correspondence between Lemminkainen and Christ. The important role of Lemminkainen's mother in relation to his ultimate resurrection, his divine salvation, proves that Lemminkainen is the second Logos or Son. Väinämöinen's mother, Ilmater, is not at all a human being. She is wholly divine, and Ilmarinen's mother is only a subordinate character. But in every ancient esoteric system, the mother of the Savior played an important role as a living human being. Christ's mother, Buddha's mother, Krishna's mother, and so on. Thus, the story of Lemminkainen and his mother is very striking. Lemminkainen's death is the only one of the three heroes' deaths about which the Kalevala tells. Besides that, his variant name in the death runes is Pekka, which means the Son of God or Son of Logos. Likewise, every savior in ancient wisdom teachings is somehow killed and goes to the underworld. Julius Krone has commented on the remarkable similarity between Lemminkainen's story and the Scandinavian tale of Baldur, son of Odin. Baldur is the god of light, and the evil Loki lures the blind Hodor, actually leading Hodor's hand, to stab Baldur with a mistletoe branch. He dies and journeys to the goddess Hel in Manala, and after 40 days he rises again from the dead. Ultimately, however, his mother is unable to save him. In this regard, Baldur's story differs from Lemminkainen. Karl Krone discusses these similarities, but attributes them to the idea that both legends are of Christian origin. In his mind, the source of these legends is found in the story of the death of Jesus, his 3-day visit to the realm of the dead, and his ultimate resurrection. In this conclusion, Professor Krone is absolutely wrong in presenting similarities between pagan ideas and the story of Christ. He shows his unprofessionalism because he uses only the Baldur tale as an example, and the Baldur tale is just one of many. Even if the Christian origin of the Baldur tale could be supported with writings from the Middle Ages, in itself not very likely. Krone's explanation falls apart when you consider the much older resurrection myths, Greek, Egyptian, Indian, and so forth. Let us look at some examples. The ancient Hindu savior Krishna was struck and killed by a hunter's arrow as he sat engrossed in meditation under a tree. So tells the ancient Bhagavata Purana, and Hindus count 5,000 years since Krishna's death. After his death, Krishna descended to Manala and was later resurrected. In Egypt, Osiris was killed by his nemesis, the evil snake Typhon. But Osiris returns through his son Horus and kills Typhon, to become the master of life beyond the grave and the judge of souls. Likewise, Jesus is killed while fighting evil, but in his resurrection claims victory over the old snake. The Apocalypse relates that Jesus has the keys of death and of Hades, and in Acts it is written that he is the one who has been appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. After his death, the Babylonian savior Tammuz stayed for 3 days in the underworld, after which he was resurrected. To commemorate the death and resurrection of Tammuz, a yearly festival of joy and sorrow was held in which someone like a clergyman said, Trust in your master because his sufferings have prepared salvation for you. Another well-known Babylonian legend tells that Ishtar, mother of Tammuz, descended to the underworld to retrieve the waters of life with which she could revive her dead son. The Greek myth about Bacchus most resembles the story of Lemminkainen because when the Titans slay Dionysus, he is cut into pieces. For 3 days he sleeps in Hades, after which Jupiter awakens him and Pallas brings him his heart. After his resurrection he takes his place in heaven. A tale that presents Dionysus as Demeter's son relates that Demeter collects and puts together the mutilated parts of her son's body and makes him young and whole again, behaving quite like Lemminkainen's mother. We can add more examples from Syria, Mexico, and elsewhere, but what we have presented should suffice to prove that the idea of a savior who is killed, journeys to the underworld, and resurrects is extremely old and universal. The Christian variant is a copy of older pagan forms. It is quite unnecessary and simply mindless to argue that Lemminkainen's rune has a Christian origin. With good reason, even better reason, it can be shown to be of Greek or Egyptian origin. Because of this, we are fully justified in regarding the story of Lemminkainen's death, his mother's self-sacrificing love, and his own resurrection as holy and of deep spiritual meaning, just as is the story of the resurrection of Jesus. Psychologically understood, Lemminkainen's rune contains a crystal-clear fact. The second person of Logos, the son of love, or, that is to say, the divine emotional force which is ultimately one and undivided, is killed and cut to pieces, dispensed among the individual members of humanity. There is a little piece of it within every human being. But what a travesty has that little piece of divine emotion become? Love has changed into self-importance, hate for others, and all sorts of distorted manifestations of selfishness and vice. Not until the resurrection or rebirth will the divine love achieve within a person its original force, purity, and unity, and be able to lead and rule souls both living and dead. The resurrection is, of course, an individual phenomenon and is therefore esoteric by nature. In psychological terms, resurrected ones are really seers who have accomplished a long and difficult mental development. Humanity as a whole is still far from its goal and never achieves it all at once. One by one, each individual gets to the end of the journey by their own efforts and aspirations. Not until all the individuals of humanity are mentally reborn can it be said that the divine Savior, the Son of God who within humanity's heart has been crucified, has been resurrected and freed from voluntary distress. Until then he actually wanders in death's realm, preaching to imprisoned souls in darkness. And he could not resurrect without his mother's help, without the aid of the great mother of nature and life. It is the school of life which educates humanity. Life is like a patient, loving mother. Where would a human soul be as a plaything of his emotions unless nature and life bound his wounds, comforted him, and instilled him with renewed spirit? When his personal emotional life is destroyed, the seed of divine love within his soul can neither help nor heal him. The mother nature then hastens to the aid of Patoin and Pekka, and only the mother's gentle and careful hand can awaken the son from death. The Ilmarinen forces. Of all the Kalevala's heroes, Ilmarinen is the only one whose original divinity is accepted by scholars. The Vadiaks today call the Christian god Inmar, which phonetically recalls Ilmari. Inmar and Ilmari were originally gods of the air. In an old sailor's chant, Ilmarinen is invoked for fair wind, and on a Lap magician's drum we find a genii called Ilmaris sending storm and gale. When classifying the deities of the Haim people, Mikael Agricola mentions that Ilmarinen is the god of peace and air, and helps travelers. The Kalevala reveals that Ilmarinen forged the sky and hammered out the firmament. In the Birth of Fire rune he is found together with Vainamoinen as the primeval lightning striker. Ilmarinen struck fire, Vainamoinen made flame flash, with a copper spike, with a flaming sword, in the 6 vaults of many colors, in the 9 heavenly spheres. Professor Carl Krohn believes Lemminkainen was originally a real person, but regards the Kalevalas vividly and realistically described Seppo Smith Ilmarinen as being just a generic character from the deep furrows of the Finnish psyche. Ilmarinen is a feature, he says, or a poetic archie-image which every Finn knows completely, and which impresses the foreigner stronger than any other, and as if to guardedly make an allowance to the school of symbolic thought. Professor Krohn simply acknowledges that Ilmarinen is historically much more real than the fame of any single Smith who ever lived in Finland. It is quite correct to say that Ilmarinen best represents the Finnish character. He is sulky and tardy and without initiative. He is a bit dumb and on the surface seems cold and emotionless. But when someone or something motivates him to work, he is extremely skillful and conscientious. And when his blood is fired with purpose, he is passionately willing and dedicated, even if it be easy to pull his leg. This can be attributed to his honesty rather than to mere stupidity. The Kalevala, however, only apparently describes the Finnish character through Ilmarinen. When the Kalevala is looked at from a local or limited perspective, Ilmarinen is naturally observed in the Finnish people. In looking at the Kalevala with our cosmic key from the universal perspective, then Ilmarinen, in embodying something of the Finnish character, also represents a fundamental feature within the soul of all humanity. And what else could this fundamental facet be besides human reason? The characteristics listed above undeniably apply to the Kalevala hero who represents the principle of reason within the collective life of humanity's soul. The same Ilmarinen force which later appears as intelligence and genius, in its first stage of development addresses the states of stupidity and indolence, and that the forces of reason are independent of emotion and therefore cold, is psychologically and metaphysically as true as the fact that passions and emotions can be stimulated, almost without limit, by thought and reason. Reason or intellect is undeniably a fundamentally human characteristic above all others. Without the Promethean light of reason, the human being is nothing more than an animal. It is reason which raises humanity above the rest of nature. It lifts humanity to the door of deity and opens up the possibility of endless development. Ancient civilizations knew this. The Indian names for human being are Manu and Manusha, derived from the Sanskrit stem man, which means to think. Manu, the human type, is thus a thinker. From the same root comes the English word man, the German Mensch and the Swedish Människa, all meaning a human being. Also from the same origin is the Latin mens, mind, from which comes mental, meaning concerning thought or intellectual processes. An interesting derivation from the root stem mens is mentiri, to lie, which, of course, unthinking beings are incapable of. There is a word that no being can use before rising to the level of humanness. This word is the Finnish word mina, sounds like the Finnish word ihminen. Is it perhaps possible to find a connection between the Finnish word mina and the Indo-European stem for the word man? And if the stem of the word ihminen is ames, it has to be remembered that s also appears in the words mens and manas. That the first syllable of the word ihminen is I and resembles the German word ich may be regarded by scholars as mere chance. At any rate, in the Finnish words mina and ihminen is reflected the ancient peaceful spirit of thoughtful and discerning action. For those with ears to hear, these meaningful derivations of everyday words prove that the human being was originally conceived as a thinking and reasoning being, since Ilmarinen thus represents in the mythology of the ancient Finns the forces of intellect. His name is esoterically appropriate because, in Theosophical literature and other sources, we know that the element air corresponds to the thought or reasoning plane. Likewise, water symbolizes the emotional plane, earth the physical plane, and fire the world of higher spirit. Ilmarinen thus means the master and sovereign of the world of discerning thought. In the Theosophical literature, as every expert knows, it has become customary to speak about the duality of the human ego, the higher and the lower mind. This division that has, by the way, slipped into our literature and everyday language, is based partly on psychological analysis and partly on a secret knowledge of the history of human development. Goethe expresses through the mouth of Faust those winged words. Two souls, alas, reside within my breast, and each withdraws from and repels its brother. One with tenacious organs holds in love, and clinging lust the world in its embraces. The other strongly sweeps this dust above into the high ancestral spaces. Every human being eventually notices how the opposites of good and evil, truth and lie, love and hate, beauty and ugliness, pure and impure, and noble and mean fight for supremacy inside the mind. And it is not enough for the opposites to feel comfortable side by side within the soul. People do not often know in their own mind what is right and what is wrong because reason can defend both. In the physical body, the natural tendency to selfishness thus often claims victory through the weakness of reasoning. Psychological handbooks speak of this conflict only in passing, mentioning the existence of a pure reason, but focus only on an analysis of mental life in itself. Everything which concerns their examination is considered to be a function of lower reason, including memory, logic, and imagination. But observation and memory correspond to the visual knowledge of higher reason, logical understanding to the cosmic character of higher reason, and imagination to the creative force of higher reason. The higher self easily serves the higher truth, but the lower self must learn to become disentangled from the domination of selfish emotions and passions by graduating from the school of experience. Without further ado, it should be clear to every philosophically minded person that a gradual development of the constantly moving lower self is impossible without the eternal thinker, the higher reason, in the background. The ageless wisdom has always defined and defended the rights and functions of the higher self. No religion has ever called the original purity of these rights selfish or sinful. All religions and all esoteric wisdom teachings advise the seeker to fight the selfishness of lower reason and emerge victorious. How is it born? Only secret wisdom teachings provide the answer. The human self has its origin in God. There is only one consciousness in the world, the God self. Human self-reflective reasoning is a fragment of the whole divine self. Human reason is a tiny fragment of the immense genii of the Logos. And how is the human self designed and given birth? When after long ages of developmental work the lower elements assemble an animal resembling a human being, like a spiritual lightning strike, the light of the world descends into the animal, material form, and the human self is born. From the dust of earth, a human being is formed, but God's Spirit is blown in from above. The Son of Reason moves from his celestial home into the human figure. The human being is truly divided from the moment of birth. One hand holds fast to his mundane hut, while the other reaches up toward the blue sky. The human self, descended from God, was born into an animal form. More details on these ideas can be found in Madame Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. From a philosophical perspective, we might conclude that the highest expression of reason is achieved when it realizes itself to be reason, that is, born from God. This is possible only with the help of the limited individual consciousness, through the purification of the lower self. As we already noted in discussing Vainamoinen and the creation of the world, the birth of the human self is so important to the world's development that it is called a second creation. In the Kalevala, the task of the second creation is given to Ilmarinen. Ilmarinen accomplishes something the others cannot. Therefore, let us now examine the activities of Ilmarinen. Ilmarinen, fire and iron. In the Kalevala's visionary language, if Ilmarinen represents the intellectual forces of humanity, why is he always working with fire and iron, and why does he forge the Sampo? While only mentioning that a smith aptly describes a hardworking inventor, and this is the intellect's fundamental character, we should emphasize that Ilmarinen represents the light of reason, and, as we will see, the smith's work has clear occult underpinnings. By describing Ilmarinen as a smith bustling with fire and iron, the Kalevala clearly spells out for those who have eyes to see that the ancient Finnish seers understood Ilmarinen's deeper occult function as well as identification with conventional traditions and designations concerning the functions of reason. The origin and function of rational forces within humanity are presented in the Kalevala primarily as three events in Ilmarinen's life: the birth of fire, the birth of iron, and the forging of the Sampo. A birth of fire provides an ethic for the descent of the forces of intellect, divine conscience, and wisdom into a human race wandering in darkness. In the previous chapter we quoted verses from the old Kalevala which depict Ilmarinen striking fire. In the new Kalevala, Ilmarinen's name is changed to the man of the air, but this phrase clearly refers to him. Ilmarinen, master intellect and god of reason, is the Prometheus who delivers holy fire to the human race. As long as humanity faithfully cares for the heavenly fire, all is well. The soul of humanity is then like the Virgin of Vesta in her obedient innocence. On the very hem of heaven, on a cloud the Virgin rocked the fire, and swung the light, swung it in a golden cradle, swaying it on straps of silver. This is the state of paradise as described in many ancient mythologies. The holy fire of the highest self enlightens the young human race which, obeying its inner light, knows little of the external world. Young Adam lives innocently within nature as its obedient servant. But the time of happiness and blessing is all too brief in the paradise of Lemuria, for the Lemminkainen forces of emotion and passion are stirring within humanity. Human beings are divided into two genders, Adam and Eve, and the holy fire of spirit loses its brightness. The calamity is described in the rune which tells how. Thus the Virgin rocked the fire and swung the light, nursed the fire spark with her fingers, sheltered it between her hands. But the stupid maiden dropped it, slipping through her careless fingers, from the hands that should have nursed it, fingers that were meant to save it. And the fire changed into burning lightning which rushed from sky to earth, bringing destruction, suffering, and distress. In this way, the intellect together with emotion creates all evil and moral suffering by breaking natural law. Lucifer, the light bringer, who in his original heavenly abode is the same as Christ, falls to earth and becomes the damned Satan, Christ's opponent. Pure reason defends truth and virtue, but through indulgence and lust, fallen reason gives way to selfishness and falsehood. As the Kalevala tells it, the cooperation of Vainamoinen and Ilmarinen is really needed. The divine forces of will and intellect must unite to raise humanity from its fallen state. And how profound is the work of those divinely born brothers! The rune containing the birth of fire greatly impresses our minds with the scope of this task, but at the last moment even they need help, and help appears. Then a little man arose, tiny dwarfman from the sea. This little man is Pavan Pekka, the son of day, meaning the son of sun or son of God, or, in other words, Christ within a human being's soul. The collective drama changes now to the individual. The little man who rises from the sea is Lemminkainen, who has grown into Patoinen Pekka. From the churning swells of emotion emerges divine love. Ix This newly born human being is the smallest of the small, yet his power is greater than the great. He is the son of God and his father helps him in this way. From the sky a knife came falling, from the clouds a sheath knife dropping, golden hilted, silver bladed, down upon his belt directly. With this sheath knife sent from the sky he cleaves open the pike and frees the fire spark which had been swallowed. Patoinen Pekka, like Christ, breaks the hold of bestiality and selfishness within humanity's heart and sets free the spark of divine intellect. However, as we mentioned earlier, this now occurs esoterically, meaning within the individual. All ancient nations considered fire to be holy and celebrated the glory of heavenly light and fire. The Ascension Day bonfire at Whitsuntide was lit in the spring not just to celebrate the vernal light but also for the glory of reason and wisdom, and even this Christian holiday at Whitsuntide brings this to mind. Without entering into a linguistic debate, we should ask why there is a similarity between the Finnish word Hela and the elm's fire of the old Germans and, furthermore, how both of these are related to the Grecian fire of Hermes. Hermes Mercury was the messenger of the gods and god of wisdom. On the other hand, the birth of Iron Rune also illuminates the human history of the intellect forces from, we might say, the mundane viewpoint. In first reading this incantation rune, we only see some speculation about the origin of iron. At the most, iron might mean physical matter in general. From the beginning verses. Air's the first one of the mothers, water, oldest of the brothers, iron, youngest of the brothers, fire, the brother in the middle. If air represents the world of thought in general and water the emotional realm, then iron is the exponent of the physical world. But since Ilmarinen plays the main role in the birth of iron and the key to understanding Ilmarinen has already been discussed, it is clear that iron as well as fire symbolizes some process or manifestation of intellectual powers. Let us not forget the meaning of fire discussed earlier. Fire is from heaven. Fire is the pure light of reason, the divine enlightenment spoken of in the Gospel of John. Remembering this, we can understand what iron really is. Iron, tells the rune, is the younger brother of fire, a close relation. After a little time had passed, Iron yearned to meet his brother, meet his elder brother, Fire, and to get acquainted with him. What else could Iron thus be but the younger brother of pure reason, the lower reason, logic, which is often considered steely, cold and hard as iron. Iron is really soft when compared to fire, 12 as is our mundane reason when compared to the heavenly, divine reason, so justifiably it is said in the Gospels. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. However, darkness and ignorance always desire light, just as in the Kalevala we read how iron yearns to meet fire. The old nations spoke about the inevitable dark Iron Age, where humanity now lives, and yearningly recalled the earlier Golden Age when the spiritual light of the higher self freely shone in the as yet unmanifest humanity. In the rune of the birth of Iron we find a remarkable feature. Iron is born through the work of Ilmarinen before Ilmarinen himself is born. We can understand this occurrence in the development of humanity through the teachings of occult wisdom. Before the Ilmarinen forces of reason and thought were fully embodied, the developing ability to think was already being formed by natural evolution. within the animal kingdom then extant, or, we might say, in the animal kingdom of which early humanity was then a part, the crude precursors of thought emerged. We do not suggest that an ability to think independently or to follow a train of reason was yet present, but within the animal group consciousness we can trace the will to self-consciousness and nuances of early thought, imitating, admiring, attachment, and faithfulness. These same traits are abundantly found even in the animal kingdom of today. The seed of understanding had already been planted in the depths of the human soul. Iron was hidden in the swamps and cliffs, as the Kalevala says, before it was allowed to emerge for humanity to see. Only after this event does the rune shift to tell us about the birth of Ilmarinen or the awakening of the higher forces of reason. Ilmarinen had been born and grown to manhood too, born upon a hill of charcoal, up on a cindery heathland, in one hand a copper hammer, in the other his tiny tongs. In the night the smith was born, on the next day built his smithy. Ilmarinen did not evolve from lower states. He was not like a newborn who can do nothing. He was born the smith eternal, already complete at birth. Having been born at night, he built his smithy the very next day. He was an old citizen from another world who took the form on earth of a recognizable figure. In the old Kalevala, when the bird sent by Lauhi asks Ilmarinen why he is so very skillful, a forger quite capable, he responds, "This is why I am so skilled, quite the skillful smithy worker. Long I watched the mouth of God, saw the beard of noble Ukko, when he previously forged the sky, hammered out the firmament." This passage clearly relates an instance of the fire of heavenly reason descending from the higher spheres of spirit to take up residence within humanity. There was the true light which, coming into the world, enlightens every man, John 1-9. Comprehension began to awaken through natural evolution. But it is not until the holy Ilmarinen forces of higher reason join with this dawning comprehension that the individual human consciousness is truly born. Natural scientists usually do not want to believe in this kind of supernatural cooperation, but one of them, Darwin's well-known colleague R. Wallace, admits that it is impossible for him to understand the origin of the human spirit by any other means than this kind of supernatural involution. Now in the rune of the birth of iron there opens a window to a historical era. There is nothing told about the happy golden age when the light of higher spirit was supreme and iron still laid in the swamp. Instead, the birth of iron story directly embarks upon telling how after the fall into sin the Ilmarinen forces begin their task of bringing the iron of logical understanding into the daylight so that it can be forged. Indeed, with these events, iron becomes very afraid of fire. Then poor iron was affrighted and afflicted, when he heard the fire speaking. When he caught the fiery meaning 56. But Ilmarinen beautifully consoles. Don't you worry about all that. Fire won't burn an old acquaintance. He won't injure his own tribesmen. When you come to the house of fire, to the burning barricade, he will grow more beautiful. In the flashing of the blades, sword blades in the hands of swordsmen, ornaments on women's garments. The mundane mind does not expand easily in the fire of the holy wisdom of higher reason. It prays to get loose from this torment of red fire. But Ilmarinen knows that evil will win altogether if the lower mind is allowed to follow its own call. If I take you from the fire, you may grow to be a terror, and commit all kinds of outrage, even carve up your own brother, cut to chips your mother's child. However, at this great moment of distress, iron, the human comprehension, promises that it has no thoughts of making evil. Ilmarinen jerks iron from the fire, sets it on the anvil and begins to form it. Now all that remains is the final trial so that human understanding can become an excellent instrument of higher reason. Yet some little thing was wanting. Iron needed something more. Tongue of iron is not boiling, and the mouth of steel unborn. Iron won't be tempered ever, till it's quenched in tempering liquid. The test of emotion. Logic must be dipped in the baptismal water of emotions and lusts, and Ilmarinen understands that the baptismal water must be sweet and good. But what happens? The bee from whom he requests honey for the baptismal tempering disturbs his plan. Then he flew and buzzed about, as he hurled down Hasi's horrors, spewed the venom of the viper, and the black blood of the adder, then the acid of the ant, hidden hatreds of the toad, into the tempering quench of steel, hardening liquid for the iron. It turns out the emotions were not all beautiful. When the lower reason goes through the swirl of bestial lusts and desires, its tenuous higher light goes out and all its power flows into these emotions. Then Ilmarinen unknowingly immerses iron in the accursed water, and this put Steel in evil mood. And poor Iron went quite mad, broke his word, the wretched creature, ate his honor like a dog, cut his brother, bit his kin, made the blood flow everywhere, gushing in a stream of gore. With dramatic realism, the rune about the birth of iron thus ends its splendid presentation of the intellectual condition of humanity, introducing problems which continue today. However, the Ilmarinen forces, in the form of culture, have had a long presence. Ilmarinen in the Sampo. The most remarkable thing that Ilmarinen forges is the Sampo. A critical key to understanding the Kalevala is therefore a correct comprehension of the Sampo. As we now understand who Ilmarinen is and what his forge represents, it should be easy to get a general idea of the nature of the Sampo. The Sampo is something produced by the forces of intellect working intensely within humanity. What could this be? Culture is what instantly comes to mind. Lonrot said long ago that the Sampo describes all the resources of livelihood current at that time. Through cultural institutions and educational tasks, the intellect that had gone astray, thrown into the lap of base passions, was again guided in the right direction. However, the Kalevala relates that it was just this Sampo that led the way to new and bigger conflicts. When Ilmarinen forged the Sampo for the mistress of Pohjola, she took it and locked it within Pohjola's stone fortress, a place the Kalevala heroes apparently did not like. The people of Pohjola certainly prospered greatly with the protection and benefits of the Sampo, but the Sampo was designed for a greater use. Thus, it was a disadvantage for the heroes of the Kalevala to have lost it. If the Sampo offers only culture, resources, livelihood, science, and art, one might suspect that Ilmarinen could just forge another one, even a better and more magnificent Sampo. But he didn't, and it is left to the Kalevala heroes to steal back the Sampo, to save it from an eternity in Pohjola's hill of stone. This scenario suggests that an even more profound and secret meaning is hidden within the Sampo. The solution to the riddle of the Sampo in this deeper meaning would answer the mysteries of age-old traditions. We already discussed how the secret knowledge does not have the same viewpoint as scientific studies in regard to the birth of civilizations, religions, and so on. The position of the secret wisdom is often contradictory. According to this secret tradition, all civilizations and religions have been installed from above. That is, through the influence of more advanced beings. At the dawn of time, humanity was as yet inexperienced and undeveloped, and the question arises as to where these higher beings came from. And for this question too, the secret knowledge has an answer. Of course, they came from some other planet, whose beings were substantially like those of early Earth, but immeasurably older and more developed. Consequently, these advanced beings served as helpers and teachers. In our time, when theories are being formulated for moving organic life from one heavenly body to another, this kind of idea should not feel impossible. The Vainamoinen and Ilmarinen forces do not succeed in holding the attention of humanity. Humanity would have stayed ignorant of its divine faculties if Vainamoinen hadn't urged Ilmarinen to forge the Sampo. Only after the Sampo is made does the delightful maid of Pohjola agree to wed. Ilmarinen thus represents all intellectual forces, and not just the intellect within individual people on earth, but also the genius and wisdom of all other advisors, teachers, saviors, and legislators who have influenced us from other realms. And now what about the Sampo? The Sampo symbolizes the secret wisdom that the original teachers of humanity brought with them from the other place, the occult knowledge embodied by the so-called White Secret Brotherhood, the seers and wisdom keepers in their invisible temple that was not built by human hands. This knowledge is even contained within the word Sampo. Castron tells of an ancient Buddhist temple whose name in the Mongolian language is Sampo and in the Tibetan language Sangfu. The latter word means a secret fountain. There exists another Tibetan word which in our thinking can be compared to Sampo. This is Zampu or Dzampu, which is the Tibetan tree of life. It has 3 roots. The first rises to heaven, to the top of the highest mountain. The second goes down to Manala, the underworld, and the third stays in the middle and reaches toward the east. If we may indulge in linguistic speculations, we could suggest that Sampo or Sambo is related to Sambo or Sambada, which in Sanskrit means the highest knowledge or wisdom. And why not also point out the Latin combination of words summum bonum, the highest good? Comparetti's attempt to explain that Sampo was derived from the artificial Swedish word Sambo is linguistically unsuccessful. The explanation by Fries that Sampo referred to the Lappish magician's drum we will reserve for later discussion. And if it be true that the explanation for legendary words must be sought in their own language, perhaps, for example, Sampo was derived from the word Samapalku, the path of wisdom walked by ancient wise men. In fact, we do not consider it impossible that the word Sampo is related to the word Sampi and Samas as modern linguists believe. But the conceptual meaning of the Sampo and the connection with these words will become clear when the mystery of the Sampo is opened later on, with our occult psychological key. Now let us remember, despite all this philological speculation, our original occult reading for the word Sampo. Then we can comprehend the words of the mistress of Pohjola when, with some suspicion and some admiration, she requires Ilmarinen to perform certain tasks. "Oho, you smith Ilmarinen, you, the eternal hammerer, if you hammer out the Sampo, and devise the ciphered cover, 63, make it from the point of swan quill, from the milk of Pharaoh cow, from a tiny grain of barley, and the fleece of summer ewe." Ilmarinen has been presented with a superhuman, supernatural, and, to the logical mind, impossible task. He will not be able to forge the Sampo by means of a human being's undeveloped faculties. It can only happen, even just in the sense of a work of art, with the help of the gods. Only a being in whom the higher self is consciously alive and whose knowledge is not limited by sensory information and logic is capable of creating the greatest artistic work of life. Only they can sculpt the secret school of life in which all humanity can be educated. The forging of the Sampo is, in our thinking, not very well described in the Kalevala. The original tradition was presumably obscured, although it is aesthetically impressive and psychologically correct if we assume, as Johanni Aho does, that the Sampo is a work of human art. The words describing the act of forging were seemingly derived from the birth of fire sequence and from the forging of the golden May. The Runo 10 verses 281 to 310 and 393 to 422 complete the forging sequence and describe what kind of Sampo Ilmarinen forged. This suffices for us to describe the forging of the Sampo. Thereupon smith Ilmarinen, the eternal hammerer, rapped and tapped, rat-a-tat-tat, clinking away with a clank, 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 deftly built the Sampo mills. On one side a flour mill, and a salt mill on the second, on the third a money mill. The new Sampo then was grinding, with its ciphered cover spinning, ground 3 binfuls every morning. First a bin of things to eat, next a bin of things to sell, last a bin of things for home. This symbolism is not difficult to understand because the teachers and messengers of the secret brotherhood installed the foundations of all cultures. Flour is bread and provides all the material needs of a human being. But people cannot live by bread alone. Spiritual food is also needed, which comes from the mouth of the Father, as Jesus said. The symbol of this spiritual life is salt, and truly Jesus also said, "You are the salt of the earth." Lastly, a wealth of resources, symbolized in the verse by money, are required to make civilization possible. Creativity could not express itself in the sciences, arts, and religions were there not a continuous supply of abundance. Is it therefore any surprise that the old dame of Pohjola delights? When the Sampo is enclosed within the stone mountain of Pohjola, hidden behind 9 locks, the great war over the Sampo begins. People are divided into 2 camps. The people of Kalevala want the Sampo, or at least a part of it, back for themselves, while on the other hand the people of Pohjola jealously guard it for their own use. What else could this be but a recollection by Finnish seers of the old battle between white magic and black magic on the continent of Atlantis? During the time of the 3rd root race, the great teachers incarnated among humanity. During the 4th root race, the black magic was developed in the land of Atlantis, reaching an alarming strength. Symbolically, the Sampo had gotten into the hands of the people of Pohjola. A great knowledge and wisdom was given to humanity, but they misused it, chaining it to their own selfish goals. The masters of the white race then decided to salvage what was left so that humanity would not totally self-destruct. Vainamoinen, Ilmarinen, and Lemminkainen, as great leaders, rallied the people of Kalevala to journey on a great mission of salvation to the dark realm of Pohjola. Likewise, the secret tradition of the Kalevala also tells how the elder seer Vainamoinen magically sings all Pohjola into a deep sleep. Even this little feature is enough to show that the war over the Sampo episode refers to the Great War on Atlantis, spoken of in many ancient legends. Reincarnation. When reading the beautiful Kalevala runes about the death and resurrection of Lemminkainen, he who is devoted to the Theosophical view of life naturally recalls an ancient doctrine which reveals to him the enigma of life, a doctrine he might also remember when pondering the Christian resurrection. This ancient doctrine is reincarnation, which, when first heard of, seems rather odd. The reincarnation doctrine implies that this life is neither the first nor the last one. We reincarnate again and again. The soul does not come from our parents, nor is it created by God at the moment of birth. The soul existed before birth, but where? It comes from the unseen spiritual world, and to there it returns after bodily death. The human soul is thus like a stranger wandering on earth. It arrives through the gate of birth and leaves through the gate of death. But reincarnation is by no means without purpose. The entire process of soul development is its goal. Without it, there can be no spiritual development. Life as a whole would just go around in circles, never able to be elevated should the individual attainments ultimately pass away. But when there exists something, the soul, to which individual experiences are drawn, like crops to the granary, then there is the possibility of continuous development over long periods. Mere physical inheritance does not guarantee the preservation of, say, the quality of genius. Creative genius is seldom shared by kin, but reincarnation allows for the movement of such traits into another life. When the human soul has developed to the point of genius, that genius is preserved and the soul can even continue growing. This is possible only because the human being is really a soul, living in the invisible world and incarnating on earth to have learning experiences and to perform certain tasks. In the Lemminkainen rune, the Kalevala beautifully emphasizes life's triumph over death. The life work of Lemminkainen is tragically cut short. He perishes before his work is done. Perhaps the fault for this may be found in his own doings, but we all feel bitter and sad when a promising life ends prematurely. This was Lemminkainen's end. Death of that undaunted lover, in the murk of death's black river, in the caverns of the dead. Yes, it was the end, but life is not all that bitter and hard. The truth of reincarnation dispels the fear of death. A human being is not forever banished from this world of experiences, sufferings, and tasks. As Mother Nature awakens him from death, and the Kalevala devotes a long rune to this mother love as if to impress upon us that we should not fear death. The Kalevala thus offers the same optimism as other philosophies, and a belief in reincarnation existed in ancient India and Egypt. For the scientifically minded, it may seem too presumptuous and hasty to conclude that the ancient Finns believed in reincarnation. In the Kalevala, it is not even clearly spelled out with so many words, and it is scientifically disagreeable to decipher words to mean something else. True enough, we will answer to this, but let us not forget that, all along, we have been excavating deeper things that cannot be seen on the surface. There is nothing unscientific in this in terms of our methods. Our interpretations, however, may be unreasonable and unscientific, or they may be reasonable and based upon deeper insights. Naturally, it is our duty to do this with a critical eye. We have our own reasons for our firm convictions that Finnish seers knew about and themselves believed in reincarnation as an unshakable law of life. As for us, we do not need any external evidence for it. But we do not think it wrong to seek for traces of a belief in reincarnation among the old runes of the Kalevala. We even feel that if the collectors of these runes and incantations would have taken this possibility to heart, their harvest would have been much greater. There are people even today in Finland who know by their own experiences the truth of reincarnation. There remains for us to see other places in the Kalevala which refer to reincarnation, such as the whole life history of Lemminkainen, with its different periods and variant names. We discussed this earlier, and we will only remind the reader that those developmental stages in Lemminkainen's life marvelously portray the reincarnational stages of individual growth. Let us name this individual soul Lemminkainen. Thus, Wet Hat the cowherder refers to an earlier stage in Lemminkainen's soul journey. Adi Saarelainen is typical of stages occurring a little later, with Lemminkainen himself following close, and Pathoin and Pekka symbolizes the final acts. And another clear instance referring to reincarnation is Vainamoinen's promise to return. Let the rope of time run out. One day go, another come, and again I will be needed. They'll be waiting, yearning for me, to bring back another Sampo, to invent another harp, set a new moon in the sky, free a new sun in the heavens, when there is no moon, no sun, and no gladness on the earth. As experts in ancient religions or modern theosophy know, There is another doctrine closely related to the idea of reincarnation. This is the law of cause and effect known to the Buddhists as karma. It is karma in connection with reincarnation that determines what the nature of each individual incarnation is to be. The innate physical abilities and mental faculties of a person are the presence of karma, that is to say, consequences of a soul's past development and effort. The family and environment one is born into are likewise determined by karma, as are the unsuspected blows of fate encountered during life. When dwelling upon the law of karma, the extent to which the human soul is truly free becomes very clear. Finnish people have always firmly trusted in the Creator or destiny. It is so allowed as often the only consolation in times of grief. And there are many Finnish proverbs that describe this fatalism from different viewpoints. Some of these are: what goes around comes around. What is left behind will be found ahead. No word is said that is not meant for something. Along the way one finds a big stump in a burnt-out clearing. A rich man may become poor. A beggar may become a general. By turns the water is road. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. The miserable man learns from his own. If only I had my present mind in past time. If I have become a slave, I once owned a slave. You knew more when you arrived. One gets wise by misfortune, not buttercakes. One's own problems teach understanding about the troubles of others. In the light of reason, a strong faith in destiny clearly requires that the law of reincarnation be understood completely. Thus it seems likely that the Finnish people were taught the doctrine of reincarnation sometime in the past. They were taught, and they still remember, to trust in destiny and the Creator, although half of what they knew was forgotten later in the Christian age. Even the proverbs given above take on a greater meaning when read with reincarnation in mind. One man does not necessarily go from being a beggar to a general in the same incarnation. But in separate incarnations the roles truly complement each other like actors on a stage. How many people sigh later in life with the thought, if only I had my present mind when I was young. If only I had the wisdom of age and experience in my younger days, I would have known how to live better. From the standpoint of reincarnation, this opportunity will indeed arise. There are people alive who truly believe that this mundane life is just one empty valley of sorrow. They don't even have the strength to consider the thought of reincarnating here. Clearly, the mundane life does not have much to offer the person who expects constant pleasure, rejoicing, and happiness. One who expects as much begins from a false assumption. And when life does not offer pleasure without distress, rejoicing without sorrow, happiness without disappointment, it is natural that the broken heart will lure reason to the abyss of pessimism. But if a person starts from the viewpoint offered by the doctrine of reincarnation, then the orientation to living totally changes, and a peace of mind comes which is hard to shake. As you see, according to reincarnation, each person is the smith of their own happiness. We experience exactly what we draw to ourselves, and we have to work for our happiness. We have to thoroughly live every joy and every pleasure. Life gifts us with life itself and the capacity to feel, enjoy, and be happy. Everything else we must work to obtain for ourselves. And even our basic faculties must be educated and developed. If it seems that we do not accomplish what we strive for, that despite all our efforts life does not live up to our expectations, this is only an appearance. When we understand that we have been here before and will be here again, then we know the difference between what we reached for and what we have achieved. In some future incarnation we will certainly achieve what we hope for in this life, and yet we need not look so far. A human being who understands the impartiality of life's laws and their ability to respond to our requests develops in his life experience the idea that one reaps what one sows. That which ends up half-finished and incomplete is not caused by life itself. The ideal goal of humanity has itself been stunted. The ideal accomplished is still filled with weakness and ignorance, and all visible striving depends on time and place. A mentally balanced person does not expect too much, neither from life nor from himself. This genuine Finnish balance is informed by a faith in reincarnation. Its great moral effect is that it wholly changes our comprehension of suffering and evil. Since we arrive here on earth to learn and life is our great teacher, suffering is not an absolute evil. Suffering is nature's answer to our errors. God does not send us just any sufferings. Life does not harass us with misfortune. But when we do not understand how to use our reasoning conscience and how to listen to our heart, and instead express our bestial instincts, then we invoke all the goddesses of suffering and distress from the depths of the human soul. What goes around comes around. We ourselves define our punishment, and life guides and grows us. Through misfortune one grows wise. Suffering is only apparent evil. It is sensual evil, not spiritual. Suffering has a cleansing effect and an uplifting movement, unless a person in great hopelessness throws himself into it and becomes trapped. Evil is not what we suffer, it is what we do. Suffering is the atonement for evil, and evil consists of selfish deeds which call suffering into the world. This is Finnish wisdom. In the cottages of Tuomla. What does the wisdom of the ancient Finns have to say about death and life after death? Investigators concur that the ancient Finns were not materialists. They had ideas about the continuation of life after death, but their conceptions of Tuomla are gloomy and gray. Matti Väyrynen writes in his dissertation, "The faith in the immortality of the human spirit and its continuation after death in a similar state as it was on earth is found to be a consistent point in pagan religions around the world. Thus arose the belief that the spirits of the deceased could appear here on earth, and ancestor reverence is a basic doctrine of pagan religion. Cultures deeply rooted in this ancient belief system are so strongly attached to it that even after the arrival of Christianity we find these dim ideas mixed into folk belief." And Carl Krone writes in his book The Religion of Finnish Runes, "Within Finnish runes, Castren has identified two different conceptions of the place where the deceased lie. According to one, the dead spend a shadow life in their graves. According to the other, they gather together at a specified location underground called Tuomla or Manala. In both cases, Castren supposes them to be dependent upon a special divine being. The grave master and his legion were called Kalma, and the masters of Tuomla and Manala went by the names Tuoni and Mana." In point of fact, we need not write yet another study of the ancient Finns' faith in immortality and their ideas about the afterlife. Our scientists have done this thoroughly. With good intent, we can recommend to our readers the above quoted works. Our task remains to show what truth is hidden behind these ancient ideas, which to scientists are merely superstition. Clearly, scientific researchers take an essentially negative stand on these matters. All ghost stories are thought to be derived from superstitious ignorance, and the light of Christian civilization drives off the spirits of the deceased. The worshipping of the deceased results from the fact that people do not know the true God. But we should momentarily put ourselves in the place of the ancient seers and look at death through their eyes. We can do this when we let Theosophy explain to us what the wisdom of the ages, collected from the supersensory experiences of innumerable explorers, has to say about life beyond the grave. This realm which a human being passes through between two incarnations is divided into three phases. First is the period of the soul's distress, in which a human being learns to see his own evil as it was expressed during life. Memories becomes vivid. He meets or believes he meets all the people he had harmed in some way, and he feels their pain himself, understands and repents. He is advised, taught, and guided to the right way. This realm is called Tuomla or Kamaloka. It is a purgatory that purifies. It is the astral world, and so on. In the second phase, the newly departed relives everything that was beautiful, innocent, and happy. It is as though he fades away from Tuomla and is once again in the world, a world without suffering or evil. His most delightful dreams come true. Whatever was imagined about being happy is now presented in lively images and feelings. All living beings whom he loves surround him with warm embrace. This realm is called heaven or Devachan. It is paradise, the realm of higher life, and so on. The third period is the preparation for a new mundane life. At the heights of his happiness and gratefulness, a human being begins to think about a new incarnation, in which he will again have the chance to experience and learn, to obtain new virtues and faculties. Thus, he abandons himself into the heart of his own soul, and the embrace is so complete that the old personality vanishes into oblivion, thoroughly being dissolved. Then, after the descent into matter is completed, and when the appropriate parents have been found, a new human baby is born into the physical world. It should be noted that at the boundary between this world and Tuomla there exists an ethereal transition state through which the normal deceased person passes unconsciously, and which separates him from the physical world once he has arrived in Tuomla. But if the deceased, for one reason or another, feels attached to the mundane life, he may stay in this immaterial transition state or return there at times from Tuomla. In both cases, he is then in a position to connect with the physical realm and associate with the living through hauntings or through a medium. The Kalevala demonstrates that these things were clearly understood by ancient Finnish seers. In runos 16 and 17 we read of Vainamoinen's journey to Tuomla and his adventure with Antero Vipun. Like Orpheus descending to Tartarus to seek his Eurydice, Vainamoinen is not dead, but is a living seeker who journeys to Manala in search of 3 magic words. And although the Kalevala does not relate much about Vainamoinen's observations regarding Tuomla, it lets him speak this warning. Never, you children of mankind, never, never, forever never, put the blame upon the blameless, never hurt the innocent. Drastic is the penalty. In the house of Tuomla, there the guilty have their spaces, sinners have their resting places, on a couch of searing slabstone, on a bed of burning boulders, under a cover of woven serpents, woven from the worms of Tuoni. The underlying truth of these words is clear. They precisely describe how evil gets its payback in Manala. When Vainamoinen does not find the magic words he was seeking in Tuomla, a herder suggests he go visit Antero Vipun. You can get 100 spells, 1,000 strands of magic verse, from the mouth of Vipunen, belly of the verseful one. The difficulties of the journey do not frighten Vainamoinen, and he finds the giant seer and awakens him from his sleep of death. The giant swallows Vainamoinen, and if Vainamoinen were an ordinary mortal, Vipunen would have done away with him as he had with the rest. I have eaten many a morsel, eaten lamb and eaten kid, eaten beef, and eaten boar, but never anything like this, nothing with a taste like this. If a man, who are you there, and what sort of human creature? I have eaten men by hundreds, by the thousands swallowed them, but never anything like this. To my mouth hot coals are rising, firebrands on my tongue are burning, cinders choking up my gullet. But Vainamoinen himself is a seer, a wise truth-seeker who clearly intends to go onward fearlessly toward his goal. He does not give up until Antero Vipunen consents to share his knowledge. Then the verseful Vipunen, oldest sage with oldest wisdom, in his mouth the greatest magic, in his bosom endless power, opened up his ark of sayings, and revealed his store of verses, for good singing, best of chanting, of the deepest origins, from the very birth of time, which not every child can copy, nor even grown-ups understand, in these dreadful days of evil, in this last and fleeting age. Who is this Antero Vipunen, and how is this giant of wisdom portrayed? What else but the realm where the deceased experience their heavenly state? Vipunen sleeps, and truly heaven is likened to a dreaming, peaceful rest. Vipunen eats everything, and truly the deceased lose their personal identity by the end of the heaven stage. Vipunen tries to chant away Vainamoinen, who is causing a great disturbance. Likewise, distress and evil are not allowed through to the heaven realm. But when Vipunen is finally won over, he opens to Vainamoinen the treasures of his knowledge, and this is true for the human being who can retain his consciousness amidst the swirl of the after-death journey. The memory stores of nature are open to him, and he is allowed to read the book of life which preserves all events since the beginning of the world. In Theosophical literature one reads of the Akashic records. Antero Vipunen holds the great, secret book of nature, and only by reading this can one become a very wise sage. Every deceased person must read it, both in Tuomla and in the heaven state, but most can see nothing but their own past doings. The happy Vainamoinen and his kind, who are not distracted by thoughts of themselves, can steadily read and absorb from nature the secret knowledge that truly belongs only to unselfish beings. We also can see that when we read the Kalevala with understanding, it speaks clearly about the nature of life after death. In the rune about the journey to Tuomla, we can understand the nature of the semi-material transition state which separates Tuomla from the physical world. Specifically, when Vainamoinen asks the girl of Tuoni to bring a boat so that he can get over the river, she refuses because Vainamoinen is not dead. We will bring the boat from here, only when you tell the reason why you come down here to Manala, without dying of disease, neither in the course of nature, nor by other doomed deceased. At first Vainamoinen tries to hide his real reason by impressing upon the girl that death by iron, water, and fire has called him to Manala. But the shortkin girl of Tuoni, the little miss of Manala, responds every time by chiding him. What a tongue-beater you are! If my father brought you here, Mana moved you from your country, Tuoni would escort you here, Mana keep your company, Tuoni's hat upon your shoulders, Mana's mittens on your hands. If iron brought you down to Mana, if steel brought you to Tuomla, then your clothing would be bloody, and the red death streaming out. If water brought you down to Mana, then your clothing would be dripping, and your hems would be cascading. If fire brought you down to Mana, or if flame to Chuonla, sadly would your hair be singed, and your old beard badly burned. The girl of Chuoni clearly speaks about the fact that even in the ethereal transition state the cause of death should be apparent. The deceased is enclosed in the semi-material ethereal ghost whose outer appearance still resembles the physical body. This is why, when the deceased appears at the moment of death to a distant friend or relative, he looks exactly like he did when he died. Those killed by disease are lean and pale. Blood streams from the wounds of those pierced by swords, and water drips from the drowned. Vainamoinen is the type of seer who journeys to the realm of the dead, and he is by no means the first of his kind to make the journey, as can clearly be seen in the words of the girl of Chuoni. Better would it be for you to return to your own country. Many there are who enter here, few there are who e'er return. Vainamoinen belongs to the few who go to Chuoni alive and return with full consciousness of the journey. These few are of many types, from the lowest magicians and mediums to the highest seers and wise men. Karl Krone is quite correct when he writes, "The belief in a magician as a medium is nothing unique to northern nations, but is a general belief in all ancient religions around the world, to make a connection to the spiritual world so that in a state of emergency it would already be known what sacrifices needed to be made, was the essential task of these magicians. While the average human being sometimes in sleep or stupor seems to loosen from the limits of the bodily perception, a magician must artificially induce this state, to excite himself into an ecstasy so the soul can depart and move freely into association with the realm of spirits." We may wonder why the ancient seers usually describe the life beyond the grave as gloomy and meaningless. We can understand this when we remember that in ancient times the souls of the overwhelming majority of human beings performed magic in the evil sense much more than nowadays. The heavenly state changes in color, meaning, and feeling with the changing growth experiences of the collective soul of humanity. The heavens of modern civilization are therefore much more interesting than the heavens of ancient nations. For people who engaged in it, sorcery and evil gave rise to frightful specters upon death, as does a bad conscience these days. Death is a day of reckoning. Many in the past, and some even today, try by different means to lengthen the semi-material state and delay the inevitable plunge into the horrors of Chuonla. The deceased of ancient nations hovered between heaven and earth in comparatively large numbers, clinging with all their effort to the semi-material state. Although the appearance of this state resembles the physical body, consisting of the most subtle form of physical matter, this body is not useful for interaction or fulfillment in any sense, and so serves to imprison the soul in an existence of gray inactivity. After some time these beings were, of course, forced to desist and abandon themselves to the depths of the unconscious, where waits the frightening revenge of Chuonla in retribution for evil done during the mundane life. It is natural that mediums and magicians of the less advanced type, the majority of seers, looked into the beyond and saw only a shadow life in the realm of Kalma or distress in the land of Chuoni. And although the noblest of seers such as Vainamoinen knew the heavenly sphere and the greatest secrets of Antero Vipunen, it was difficult to describe these things to the common people except to say that it was happy and restful for those who had lived well. As certain proverbs say, "A good person lives well, and it is beautiful to die with honor. The deceased have fallen asleep. The child is spared in heaven. Wherever one dies, in heaven the same measure is used for all. A human being dies as he has lived. The deceased has used up his turn. Peace for those still living, rest for those deceased." The playing of Vainamoinen. Aesthetically, the most beautiful, eloquent, and grandiose place in the Kalevala is the description of Vainamoinen playing the cantel in runos 41 and 44. Here we see the deep reverence of the Finnish people for nature. For them, nature is not dead or strange. Furthermore, apparently lifeless objects are really full of consciousness and emotion and are as close to the human heart as living beings. Human beings are truly just a link in the great chain of nature, brothers to all and equal to all beings in nature. Although in the Kalevala one consistently meets with this viewpoint of the ancient Finns, that of nature animated and personified, the totality of this belief is well represented in the description of Vainamoinen's playing. Vainamoinen enchants all of nature and all living beings with his playing. Even though Effa Haistesko considers the scene to have been created by joking and free imagination, his words also suggest the commonly held opinion that this passage contains the most sublime truth for those who read it with understanding. In fact, it opens to us a new understanding of the mental landscape in which the lively truth-seeking of the Kalevala sages can be recognized. Through his playing we here meet the Vainamoinen, who is a great and perfect seer. He can no longer be regarded as an average truth-seeker, for he raises himself to dizzy heights above the rest of humanity, where nobody can even touch the strings of his cantel. Julius Krone says this about Vainamoinen's superiority. He has abandoned his private needs of happiness. He has sacrificed his entire life, all his thoughts and feelings, to the fatherland, or instead of fatherland, to the common good, as Raphael Engelberg remarks. He, Vainamoinen, has almost achieved human perfection. He is the firstborn of his nation and is even likened to a father in this rune. While the patriarch rejoiced in Vainamoinen with his playing. Through Vainamoinen's relationship with nature, and nature's attitude toward him while listening to his playing, we can understand in what manner the Finnish seers comprehended the relationship between an ideal human being and nature. We can also find in this description a grand teaching. The mightiest possession of a Superman is his nearly unlimited dominion over nature. This was not won with violence nor by other frightful means, but by love. With a force of beauty and truth he has captured the heart of nature and won its sympathy. Both living and lifeless things are charmed by him, listen to him, and are obedient to him from sheer rejoicing. Nature, the consciousness of which was not fully known within human consciousness, has now been transformed through the great human being whose heart pulsates with joy and the desire to serve. With unlimited trust and without reserve, nature now gives to the seer all the love and enchantment which it always held within its bosom for humanity. Let us examine this in more detail. The rune first relates how all the animals gathered to listen to Vainamoinen's playing. There was not a single creature, of the forest, of the woodland, not a single 4-foot runner, not a single hind leg leaper, that did not run out to listen, and to wonder at the joyance. Every creature of the air, every flyer on 2 wings, scurries like the driven snowflakes, swirling, racing to arrive, to listen to the honored player, and to wonder at the joyance. There was not a living creature, not one even of the water, not one single 6-fin swimmer, from the finest school of fishes, that did not swim up to listen, and to marvel at the joyance. And the rune specifically mentions all kinds of wild animals: squirrels, elk, lynxes, wolves, bears, eagles, hawks, sea ducks, swans, buntings, larks, pike, salmon, whitefish, crickets, and perches. All obeyed the call of the seer, and the hearts of all jumped for joy. Is there not contained in this a remarkable lesson for human beings? Look, says the old Finnish wisdom, you people have tamed some animal species and made them friends and willing servants, but the forests, air, and waters are full of living beings whom you fight or whom you compel to be your servants. How far away you are from your goal! A perfected human being, one who is a seer, does not wage war against even a single creature, for he loves all and all loves him. And indeed, it seems that another wise seer, named Paul, conveyed the same meaning when writing those well-known words. For the anxious longing of creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. Paul's letter to the Romans. And this vision of the future that both the Kalevala and the Bible present is not without foundation. And if we are allowed to trust even a little bit the legends from the Middle Ages and the stories of journeys to the Eastern lands, reality has many times corroborated the information given in the holy books. In India it is said that when a saintly yogi sits in meditation, no animal is afraid of him. The birds of the sky freely approach him, beasts of the forest feel attracted and draw near, even tigers and snakes crawl up to his feet and bathe in the glow of the love which radiates from his being. And why should we consider these legends to be just the products of naive imagination? Indeed, these stories are woven around a hidden core of truth, and therefore they often contain greater truth than the so-called historical presentation. And who doesn't know the legends from the Middle Ages about St. Francis of Assisi? Let us review a couple of these stories which clearly show the charming power he had over animals. Once, when he was preaching in a field to a large crowd of people, a flock of swallows came flying by and made such noise that the words of St. Francis were lost upon his listeners. After realizing this, Francis peacefully turned to the birds and said, "My dear swallow sisters, please be quiet for the time of my speaking and explaining. You too can listen." Instantly the flock of birds stopped and hovered silently above the crowd, and not a single one of them flew away before Francis had finished preaching. The other story is about a wolf. Once, upon arriving at a distant village, Francis was told of a big frightening wolf who did terrible damage to the village, almost every night demanding to eat a sheep, hen, or some other animal. In the evening, Francis walked outside the village to wait for the wolf. When the big gray wolf came along with great hunger and crudeness, without fear the great friend of all animals approached him, spoke with him, and gestured to shake hands with him. The wolf raised his paw and nodded his head in understanding when Francis gently reproached him. "Brother Wolf, why have you thus chosen the living place of poor folk for your hunting grounds? And why do you harass their domestic animals? It is not right, and you are not allowed to behave like that. Now promise me that you will leave the village in peace." And the legend tells that the wolf kept his promise and the village was left alone. But the Kalevala does not only tell about animals who are charmed by Väinämöinen's playing. The vegetable kingdom also participated in the common joy. Tall old pine trees jubilating, tree stumps dancing on the heaths. Furthermore, as if to show that the playing of Väinämöinen was not an isolated incident but was a characteristic feature of his life, the Kalevala tells us, when he sauntered in the fir woods, roaming among the evergreens, spruces bowed down there before him, pine trees turned upon the hill, cones were rolling on the ground, and the needles showering down. When he roamed the leafy groves, or he walked the open clearing, all the leafy groves were merry, and the clearings always joyous, while the flowers waked to frolic, and the seedlings set to dancing. Even the vegetable kingdom is said to be a living, conscious world, which can feel love, rejoice, and grief. And though we humans know a little bit about the soul life of the vegetable world, many of us are ready to laugh at the mere suggestion that flowers and trees, by their own nature, are mental beings. But let us ask the opinion of those who spend much of their time with plants, gardeners, flower breeders, caretakers of house plants, and so on. Surely we will hear how different trees and different flowers each have their own unique natures, that plants can be in good or bad humor, that they know clearly enough if they are being loved or not. And why are people fond of their place of birth? Why is there always a longing to return? Especially within the Finnish character there lives a deep, gnawing feeling of homesickness. When a Finn is abroad, his mind is haunted by his homeland, its spruces and birches, its knolls and hills, its lakes and rivers, strawberries in one's own land, blackberries from a strange land, or, as it is said in the Kalevala, water's better drunk at home, even from a birch-bark shoe, than honey mead from golden bowls, at a stranger's sumptuous table. On what does this feeling depend? Does it mean that the impressions of childhood are the strongest? Yes, but that is not all. The impressions of childhood are strong because the young heart is pure and sensitive to its surroundings. But love comes not only from other human beings. All of nature loves the child. Our attachment to our birthplace depends as much upon the love inherent in that place as upon our love towards it. The feelings come from both sides, and we Finns have an inborn inclination to understand our nature. In our own love nature, there is something mute, unexplainable with words, which corresponds to the soundless feelings of trees and plants. The wisdom of the ages preserves the viewpoint that the vegetable kingdom does not really consist of unconscious organisms, but instead represents an educational classroom in the developmental system of consciousness. Upwards from the mineral kingdom, the realms of nature take huge steps along which living consciousness slowly ascends to the level of human consciousness. Not until consciousness reaches the level of the human form does it individualize. Before this, it expresses itself as a species or group consciousness aspiring to the personal individuality of the highest animals. From the standpoint of the secret science, it is thus undeniable that nature is full of soul and emotion. When a thoughtless boy with stick in hand whips up the grass and flowers, trampling underfoot whatever happens to be in front of him, nature suffers a mute pain. But when, in the autumn, the reaper mows the ripened corn, the fields rejoice. Truly, humanity has been invited to participate in the great educational work of nature. But we fulfill our duty poorly when we treat nature cruelly, coldly, or without concern. Let every Finn learn from the Kalevala the kind of lovely relationship a good and gentle person can have with our loving but mute nature. And the Kalevala does not limit its deep knowledge of nature to the so-called organic or living nature. Even lifeless nature has within it consciousness and feeling. Even it rejoices with the playing of Vainamoinen, the human seer who played so greatly that mountains echoed, boulders crackled, all the crags and cliffs were quaking. In the waves the rocks were splashing, gravel swirling on the waters. And, when he played in his own cabin, in his simple home of pine logs, rafters rattled, floorboards bounded, ceilings singing, doors hallowing, with the windows wide rejoicing, even all the hearthstones stirring, and the birchen uprights whooping. This imagery is so aesthetically natural that it seems to portray the rune singer's intention to show us how lifeless things, in their own way, respond to the sound waves emanating from his playing. But when one knows the ideal circle of the Kalevala, one knows well enough that the rune really means that the cliffs and stones, ceilings and floors, windows and doors, fully participate in the collective rejoicing. When understood in its esoteric meaning, this viewpoint is not a great leap out of reality. What was said above about the vegetable kingdom holds true, with slight changes, even in the inorganic or lifeless world. Even the mineral kingdom feels, though in a slower and weaker way. Also, lifeless things can rejoice and love although they, and with a greater measure than living nature, can only reflect the sympathy and tenderness that we have directed at them. Look at how we become subtly attracted to and attached to our tools and furniture, our books, our pieces of art, and to our entire lifeless houses. When we take gentle care of them, attend to and talk to them, treat them like our children or our friends, they are also in a good and grateful humor. Look happy and cheerful, serve us willingly, console us when we are in low spirits, and advise us when we are uncertain. What a social world can human beings create from the lifeless things of the home? Poets are able to do this, and common people, in their ignorance, tend to pity and smile condescendingly on the dreamers. Even scientists have finally observed that metals can become tired, and everyone knows this by their own experience. After long use, nobody's razor is ever as good even though it is regularly sharpened. It has its own sense of humor. Barbers are said to have an adage: "This razor is now tired. Let it rest for a while, so it will again work excellently." We call it weariness, but who knows what the razor itself calls it when making its own psychological studies. The fact is only that metals are sometimes lively and sometimes tired. And what about the machines? Let us ask the machinist if his machines are a lifeless species, so we can get to the truth of this. Dead, indeed. They are certainly living and quite capricious beings. If a stranger touches my machine, it instantly takes ill and gets out of gears. Railway engines, for example, are only in union with their own drivers and do not stand a chance with someone else. They also must rest from time to time. Otherwise they will perform badly and will not have the strength to haul. The Kalevala has gotten surprisingly deep in its look at the soul life of nature. This is clear also from the fact that the ancient Finnish seers have not merely looked at the soul of visible nature, but have witnessed in the invisible mental world the subtle expressions of life and beings which have no physical counterpart. A materialist considers these impressions to be the product of mere imagination, but the seeker of truth knows there are people living today for whom the inhabitants of the unseen realm are as real and true as those in the visible world. The Kalevala's rune of Vainamoinen's playing enumerates these beings, and they all gather around Vainamoinen to listen to his play. Then the watchful Tapio, he, the master of the woodland, and of all the woodland people, traveled to the mountain peak to enjoy the music fully. Even Tapiola's mistress, watchful matron of the woodland, in red laces, halted on a birch knee, moving to the elbow of an altar, there to hearken to the harp, to absorb the joyous music. Even nature's airy daughters, beautiful virgins of the sky, listened to the thrilling music, rejoicing with the gladness of it, some upon the rainbow's rim, shimmering on the shaft of heaven, some upon a little cloudlet, resplendent on the roseate border. Then the moon-maid, dainty virgin, and the sun-maid, skilful damsel, busily plied their weavers' reeds, nimbly lifting up their heddles. Both were weaving cloth of gold, interlacing threads of silver, seated on a red cloud border, by the overarching rainbow. When they heard the charming music of that graceful instrument, from their hands the shuttles slipped, and the battens of their fingers, breaking off the threads of gold, as the silver heddles echoed. Otto, king of wave and water, sedgy-bearded patriarch, heaves himself up to the surface, rests upon a water lily, where he listens to the joyance, even the mistress of the water. She, the sedgy-breasted matron, rises from the deep sea bottom, and emerges from the wave, there to hearken to the gladness of old Wainamoinen's playing. There she fell into deep slumber, lying prone upon her stomach, on a many-colored rich rock, prone upon a solid slabstone. These are the guardians of earth, air, water, and fire, whose existence is a mere fairy tale in the eyes of a blind civilization. But the ancient Finnish wisdom knew just as much as the original composers of the tales of alchemists and occult scientists from the Middle Ages, who also mention and classify the elementals of nature. Paracelsus is the father of modern medicine, and truly he was a quite modern observer in many respects. Yet he believed in the existence of nature spirits, and, as in the Kalevala, lists 4 types: gnomes or tapios, people who live on the ground; sylphs or the air virgins of Leonard; undines or oddies and sockcotters who live in the water; and salamanders or cooters and pavetters who live in fire. In ancient times, people lived in a closer relationship with these unseen beings than we do nowadays, because these elemental fairies have more immediate power over nature and the forces of nature than us humans. It is natural that people in past times prayed for their help, sought their favor, made unions of friendship with them, and so on. All of the fear and ignorance-based worship of nature that our scientists propose to explain our ancestors' beautiful understanding of the elementals clouds these facts with a different meaning. If we do not see that millions and billions of beings use this miraculous planet as their home and school, if we think that this earth globe is created only for us, then we, the children of modern times, are the ignorant and superstitious ones. These beings are in a different category of nature, and have nothing directly to do with the kingdoms of nature we already know of. This is the end of the Key to the Kalevala, Part 1.